Hey everybody, we got a couple minutes before we start here. Just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Ryan Ellis. I am the chair of the AMS Board for Operational Government Meteorologists. And I've been working with the National Weather Service for 10 years in the Raleigh, North Carolina office. And when I took over the board this year, I wanted to kind of add a focus to it, not necessarily shift focus, but add focus to our students. I remember a long time ago when I was in school at the University of Miami, it was, you know, a lot of times you're focused so much on your schoolwork and things like that that you're not out there looking for that information, or you're trying to get more information on what's out there for jobs and things like that. And the opportunities in our field are growing. There's a lot of different niches you can get into. I think there's something for everyone out there. So if you're interested in the National Weather Service, if you're interested in emergency management, those avenues are open to you. And we have some great speakers today that span those categories. So we've got people from NOAA, we've got people from FEMA, we've got state emergency management, and so there's a lot of different things that we can get into. And the speaker lineup is really good, and you're going to learn a lot. Now, a couple of ground rules before we get started. If you have questions, you can put them in the question box. And I will go through those, and we'll take a few questions for the speakers as we have time, as time allows. And if not, all of these people are very approachable, so reach out to them if you have follow-up that you want to do afterwards. And this is a very service-oriented bunch of people. I've never met anyone that wasn't willing to help you out. So ask those questions and interact as much as possible. The session is being recorded, so I've had a lot of questions that that people want the recordings. So we're gonna try to do that. I'm seeing Trisha's note here that there might be some bandwidth issues. Could be the webcam. Probably is. Once I close that, I think it'll be fine. All right. So without further ado and cutting into their time, we're going to have our first speaker here. Speakers. We have Trisha Palmer. She's at the National Weather Service office in Greenville, Spartanburg. And we have Laura Belanger from the National Weather Service office in Peachtree City, which is outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And they're going to kind of tag team this first talk and go back and forth a little bit. So we will pass that on. They're going to have an hour to speak, and then we'll move on to our next speaker. So Trisha, we'll start with you. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, I will make you the presenter, and you can take it away from there. Thank you so much for doing this today.
All right, well, good morning. As Ryan said, my name is Trisha Palmer. I'm a lead meteorologist at the National Weather Service in Greenville, Spartanburg. My co-presenter today is Laura Belanger. She's the senior service hydrologist at the National City. Our presentation is on applying to the National Weather Service, entry, stats, and application resources. Background here, Laura and I developed the first version of this presentation a few years ago, back when I was at Peachtree City and we were both general forecasters. At the time, we co-led the student volunteer program, and we put the original presentation together as a local outreach project with nearby universities. We've updated the presentation a few information as it comes out, and we presented it several different times as well, including last year for the June 2017 NWA Webinar Wednesday. We're really happy to share it again with you guys today, and hopefully you'll all find it informative. As Ryan also said, Laura and I will be tag teaming the presentation, going back and forth, so please bear with us during the transitions. We'll be talking a little bit about diversity in the Weather Service today. So the picture here on our title slide is from March 30th of 2017, when Atlanta had an all-female crew on board, and just for have the MIC there, Keith Stellman. And then here's me in operations at GSP. Today we're going to cover several topics. We're going to start out with some basic background information on the National Weather Service, which some of you may already know, but it's a good overview for those who don't. Then we're going to go over some information about employment in the federal government, the Weather Service specifically. Then we're going to move into the nuts and bolts of the application process, and we'll finish with some enlightening statistics gathered from a few mass intern bids over the past few years. As a disclaimer, Laura and I are part of the operational staff at our respective offices. And while we've bid on jobs ourselves and we've reviewed probably hundreds of resumes and have been involved in the selection process at our current offices, we're not officials. Also, we're giving information based on current procedures and data. Things can and occasionally do change, as you'll see with some adjustments I'll mention here in the presentation. So if you're watching this as a recording later, please keep that in mind. Okay, so I have here the National Weather Service mission statement, and I'm not going to read it to you verbatim, but the important thing is that we provide science-based decision support services for the protection of life and property. Now, as you will hopefully know, we are our parent agency is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is part of the Department of Commerce. We have several sister agencies within NOAA, Office of Atmospheric Research, and NESDIS being probably the most familiar for you guys. As for the local field offices within the Weather Service, we have three main types. We have weather forecast offices, river forecast centers, and center weather service units, which are more aviation meteorologists. The U.S., besides the NCEP centers, which are listed here on the right, the Weather Service is broken up into 6 regions, which include almost 180 separate field offices. And we're going to be focusing on the weather forecast offices in this presentation. Just for a geographical representation, this should give you a good idea of where all of these offices are located. You can see the 6 regions by the color shading of the states in the background. Atlanta is in southern region, so the purple states, and my office, Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina, is in eastern region, so the green states. The sort of squiggly lines all through there, those are the RFC boundaries, which rather than geopolitical are geographical based on the river basins. So that just sort of gives you an idea of where their areas are. Now, just again, some more notes and disclaimers. As I mentioned before, we're going to be focusing on weather forecast offices in this presentation, but we want you all to realize that there are really a variety of career options and paths in the Weather Service, including information technology, hydrology, hydrometeorology, aviation, and even others. As a case in point, Laura was recently promoted at Peachtree City from a general forecaster to the senior service hydrologist. So please feel free to let us know if you'd like any more information, either during the presentation if you have questions, or afterwards, or always offline at any time. Okay, now the typical career ladder at a Weather Service forecast office looks something like this. You're going to start as an intern, where you're doing lots of training and learning the ropes. Now, just to put this out there, there is a proposal to change the intern position and actually absorb it into the general forecaster position, and this may go into effect in the next couple of years. Until then, though, after the intern, you move to general forecaster, and after that, you can move up to a senior forecaster. Now, the difference on a senior forecaster isn't necessarily about it. Certainly you have to be a general forecaster first, but the more it's about supervision. The senior forecaster is the shift supervisor on every shift. And then after that, if you choose, you can move up to management. The warning coordination meteorologist is the liaison with external customers, the emergency management community, media, while the SOO, the science and operations officer, is in charge of science and research and training in the office. And then finally, there's the meteorologist in charge, who in addition to being a meteorologist is also in charge property, contracts, all the stuff that you went to 4 to 6 years of college to learn to do, right? Yeah, no, not quite. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Laura to talk about some statistics and background about federal employment. So bear with me for just a second. And Laura, you should have it. And don't forget to unmute yourself.
Okay, so as Trisha mentioned, my name is Laura Belanger. I am here at the Weather Forecast Office in Atlanta. And this section, we're going to focus a little bit on the meteorologist job statistics that are out there. Okay, so if you go and look at the Bureau of statistics and look to see how they break down the field of meteorology and the jobs associated in that field. The latest statistics that they have are from 2016, and there's about 10,400 meteorologist jobs in the United States. Now that does vary between government, private, academia, broadcast meteorologists, and then some other things like, for example, the military that aren't included into that government category. Now you can see that only about a quarter of the jobs out there are associated with government agencies, and about 40% of those are in the private group. And we could argue now that students that are exiting college now with their degrees have more opportunities in the private sector than people who have been working in the field for many, many years. So that's a good thing to hear. And the other good thing is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they expect that there's going to be a 12% job growth over the next 10 years from when these statistics were created. So by 2026, they're expecting nearly 12,000 meteorology jobs. So that's always good news to hear for people who especially are just now entering into their academic careers for meteorology. Now, one of the big always hear from people who are looking into the weather, how kind of the makeup and diversity is the gender makeup of the National Weather Service. And so we just kind of took two screen captures here of the 2009 makeup of the Weather Service and then the 2017 makeup of the Weather Service. And you can see that the number of women entering the workforce has actually increased. So, and these are Weather Service permanent employees. These aren't just, you know, general NOAA temp employees. These are permanent employees. So that's a good thing. Now, if you were to break that down by the meteorology positions, so Trisha spoke about those entry-level meteorologists, the interns, those are still permanent positions coming in, and then moving to general forecaster, so on and so forth until you get to management. You can see that there is a little bit of a skew towards more male-dominant percentage in the lead forecasters and management. There is some issues with keeping or retaining those women as they move up in their careers. And so that's a big focus in trying to get women to stay in the career field and making some adjustments to the work environment. Now you can see that it's about a little less than a quarter of the workforce there, and interns and general forecasters are female. And then if you move further into the ethnicity of the Weather Service, again, we're comparing 2009 and 2017. These are self-reported statistics, so it's however the person identifies themselves, but you can see that we've actually become more diversified in the Weather Service, and so that's a good thing as well. Now, when you look back at the education background, the academic background and experience of those who are in the Weather Service. Again, these are self-reported statistics, and these are of current employees. So bear in mind that this does include like administrative assistants or those in the technology side of things, like our service analysts and all those systems analysts. Their statistics are also included in this pie chart, but you can see that bachelor's degrees make up about 60% of the Weather Service. We're now starting to see more and more people entering the Weather Service workforce with higher level degrees. For example, we've got more than a quarter with a master's degree, and so on and so forth. So that's a big thing, and we'll highlight that a little bit more in one of the later sections on how you can make yourself stand out when you only have a bachelor's degree. Now, as far as the salary potential goes, again, we're breaking this down by those Bureau of Labor Statistics type categories, and you can see that the government, the Weather Service, is really starting out forecasters with that box and whiskers. If we're looking at the bottom of the box, we're starting forecasters out a little bit higher than the rest of these average positions in these other sectors. Now, I will say that the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that the average salary or the median salary for meteorologists is about $92,000 a year. But keep in mind that that does include people like broadcast meteorologists. And when you're in a big market, you do have the potential to be paid a little bit more. That's why you see that whisker in that category go up all the way up to $250,000. So one other thing to notice here is that most of these categories are topping out around $100,000. Now, if you have more of a specified niche, for example, like let's say you're in programming or something, especially if you get in the private sector, you may have the potential to increase your salary a little bit more. And so you're seeing that reflected a little bit in the whisker on the upper end of things. Now, if we were to look at several different companies, this came from a self-reporting site, Glassdoor.com. It had to have at least 4 people with general forecaster title. We included them in this graph to give you some kind of idea of how people are getting paid. So you can see that the Weather Service really on average has the highest average salary there on that far left of the graph. And you can see that there are others that have that start their forecasters off at a much lower level. So just to give you some perspective here on where the Weather Service, you know, an arguer, a pro for joining the Weather Service workforce, this is a good graph to show that. Now, within the Weather Service, once you enter as an entry-level meteorologist or an intern, you're starting on that lower end, but you very quickly can get promoted to a GS-12 level. It usually takes anywhere between 1 and 4 years, and there's a rigorous training requirements that are included in this 1 to 4 year period. And some people can get those done a little bit earlier, depending on when you enter the workforce, what time of year that is, and when those training courses are offered. But traditionally, within that short span of time, you jump up to a GS-12, and you could retire at this level, actually. But most people use that as a stepping stone to get further into the workforce. So a GS-13, those are our lead forecasters. As Trisha mentioned, those are the ones making supervisory type decisions in the operations area. And you can see that at that point, you're going over $100,000. And then if you move into the management side of things, you're over $100,000 and inching up towards 125, 130, depending on how long you're in the Weather Service. Now, this does vary based on where you're located. We do have locality pay. So somebody who lives in California, for example, gets paid a slightly higher amount than some other rural portions of the country. Now, as far as other benefits for federal employees, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about pros and cons, that sort of thing. As I mentioned, there's locations across the country. With 122 offices, you could basically go wherever your little heart's desire, and that's a great thing. The con to that is that at times our hiring is a lot lower than others, and so, you know, in general, we're looking at 25 to 50 jobs or people that are hired each year to fill vacancies. On the pro side, you have a known salary potential. You know what that window, that range is. And again, we tend to be on the higher side of average compared to other private companies. But at the same time, if you're looking for a really high salary, the government work may not offer that. Salaries greater than $150,000 are pretty rare. You may be in better luck going into the programming or IT side at a private company doing weather or model training or something like that. Now, we do have compensation for working sort of odd hours. We do get extra pay for nights, Sundays, holidays, and overtime, but rotating shift work is often required. Even in my role as the senior service hydrologist, there's a certain component of rotating shifts that is still necessary and still required. And so some people really enjoy having, you know, weekdays or days off and working nights, but some people may not. Other pros and cons, for example, we have great job security. Nearly every year we get an annual pay raise that tries to help us keep up with inflation. But on the con side, you know, the job security and nearly annual pay raises, it may be not quite what you're looking for. Somebody who has the same position title you do is going to get paid the same amount regardless of the amount of time and effort that they put in their position compared to you. At the same time, though, you do have the opportunity for some cash awards, which are like small bonuses for helping yourself stand out, contributing above and beyond to the operations of your office. Positions other than the intern position, the government offers paid moving expenses. So if you have received a job across the country, your move will get paid by the government. And so that's a big pro as well. And then we have excellent benefits, time off, retirement. Those are things that I'm going to cover here in just a minute. Now, unfortunately, as far as the cons go, a lot of people have this idea that we're the government, we're here to help stigma, and so that can be a negative. And so that may be a big thing that you have to overcome in dealing with your partners. Change can be slow, and at times there's a lot of red tape that you have to move through or push through to allow things to go into effect or to improve things. Now, as far as your benefits go, the government does offer a generous leave program. We have holidays, we have vacation and sick leave. We call the vacation annual leave. Now, your sick leave accrues all the time, and so that there is no maximum there. And as far as vacation time goes, you are allowed to accrue and roll over 30 days of leave, and then that rolls over to the next year. You continue to accumulate more. In general, it ranges between 12 and 26 days off, which is pretty significant. Now, if you compare that to another company, I've put 2 companies on there, and you can see that the number of holidays, the amount of vacation time and sick leave isn't always comparable, and so that's important to remember as well. The government does offer health, life, disability, and long-term care insurance if you choose to participate in those programs. And then we have the thrift savings plan, which is a good way to save for retirement. There is a government match, dollar for dollar, up to 3% of your base pay. And then up to 5%, they do continue to contribute. And so that's big. A lot of companies don't do that. And so that does help put away money for retirement as well. Now, I'm going to pass it back to Trisha, and she is going to speak to you guys about applying for a national weather position and sort of the ins and outs of that.
Okay, well, thanks, Laura. Alrighty, first, some background on the general schedule. Laura mentioned the GS levels associated with intern, forecaster, etc. This is the pay system that covers the majority of civilian white-collar federal employees. The Office of Personnel Management administers it. Within the general schedule, there are 15 grades, and Laura mentioned that like MICs are GS 15s. And within each grade, there are actually 10 steps. Each step is approximately a 3% increase in salary. So within one grade, though, it normally takes 18 years to advance from step 1 to step 10. Now, for an intern, that's not really much of an issue because you usually move up pretty quickly. So now that we at least recognize what GS means, we can talk about the entry-level requirements for the various GS levels that are covered in the intern position. What I have listed here is the minimum requirements for each entry-level position, GS 5, 7, and 9. Now, as a note, interns skip the even number GS levels, going from 5 to 7 after a year if all the training requirements are met, like Laura mentioned, and then 9 after another year, and then you max out at GS 11, whereas a general forecaster is a GS 12. And that's once you get to a 12, that's when those steps, 12, step 1, step 2, that's when they really start taking effect. So here you can see approximately how much the salary increases for each GS level within the intern position, which is actually a pretty substantial difference. Now, just as a note, though, you may be qualified for a GS 9, say if you have your master's degree, but you may only be offered a position at a GS 5 or at best 7. So you've got to keep that in mind and be ready to accept that if you're willing to take it. Now, in order to become a meteorologist with the Weather Service, you must have your degree in atmospheric sciences or related field. That includes everything listed on this slide. Again, I'm not going to sit here and read it all to you because this is all clearly listed at USA Jobs, and I'll talk about USA Jobs in just a second. But it's important that you all realize you must meet these requirements before you bid. So how does the application process work? Well, first you have to have your resume ready, and hopefully most if not all of you do. Once a position is posted, you can then apply. Each position is usually open for about 2 weeks before it closes. And once the bid closes, the applications are reviewed by our workforce management office. Now, as a note, these are human resources personnel. These are not meteorologists. First, they go through to determine if the candidates meet the minimum requirements. So anyone who isn't deemed eligible is kicked out. You're deemed not eligible, you're kicked out, and that'll show up on your USA Job status. After that, they go through the applications a second time to rank the candidates based on a variety of criteria with questions that are answered within the application. It's only after these 2 passes that approximately the top 10% of candidates are sent to the selecting official, which is typically the MIC. And we call this top 10%, we call that the panel. And then the MIC and or his or her team reviews the applications, and then they narrow down the top several for interviews if they choose to do them. And then after the interviews, the MIC then gives the name of the selectee to workforce management, who then in turn contacts the selectee with the offer, who then in turn accepts or rejects the offer. And then the real fun begins with lots of paperwork. Now, this whole process can take as little as 12 weeks to as much as a year, depending partly on how busy workforce management is and how long it takes to process all the paperwork and a few other random factors. So just, again, keep that in mind. You might not get something right away. It might take some time. Okay, so how do you apply? Well, first you need to go to usajobs.gov. You've got to create an account, and they have a new process just this year that you create a login.gov account, which will include USA Jobs. Once you have an account, you create your profile with your background and demographic information like your address, your phone number, and things like that. And after that's done, you can add documents such as your resume, your transcripts, and anything else that you need. And we'll talk more on this later. Once you've created your profile and your resume and all that, you're going to want to start searching for jobs. The easiest way to do this is by position, and each position has a specific series number assigned to it. Meteorologist, for example, is 1340. However, not only NOAA employs meteorologists, so if you're looking for weather service jobs, you can narrow these down by department and agency. So here's an example of a search for 1340 meteorologist jobs. And on the lower right here, you can see where it says department and agency. So you can click on that to narrow down just to NOAA positions. Also, you'll see the little colored dots by each position. If you're not in the federal government, you need to look for the light blue dots, meaning that the position is open to the public, because you won't be eligible for anything in the dark blue or the green or whatever because you're not already a federal employee. Now, as I mentioned before, the positions are generally open for 2 weeks at a time. You're going to want to preview the vacancy questions by clicking on the little plus sign by how to apply. And you scroll to the very bottom of that pop-up window and you'll see where it says click here to preview the questions. Now, this is really important because it's these questions that will rank you when workforce management does that second pass. There are several questions that you're going to need to answer, and you'll need to support your answers with information in your resume. Definitely maximize your answers and give yourself the benefit of the doubt, but please, please do not lie. So here's just an example of one of the questions and the different answers that are available for you to choose. Sometimes the way the answer is worded won't necessarily apply specifically to you, but do your best and find the answer that makes the most sense if you can. Now, a tip for the application process is to take certain keywords or phrases and embed them in your resume. So for example, in this question here, do you have experience, yada, yada, yada. Maybe zero in on the real-time and archive databases or data integrity and weave those into the wording of your resume somewhere. Okay, so for something new, for the past few years, these bids for interns have been open as mass bids with positions for 10 or maybe 20 or more offices announced in the same bid. You'll see the one that I just had on the previous slide had like 30-something offices. It was a huge number. And in the past, you could apply for every one of those locations listed. And then the MICs would get a ridiculous number of names to weed through, with some approaching 200 applicants on their panel. So as you might imagine, if that's the top 10%, you know, we're having between 1,000, 2,000 people applying for these jobs. But this year, they're no longer allowing that. You can only choose up to 5 locations. Now, supposedly, this makes it easier for the MIC because there are fewer candidates. I heard from an MIC at a very popular office who said it really didn't make much of a difference there. But then I heard from a SUE at a more remote office that said they only got 10 applicants when this went into effect, whereas in years previous, they had been getting 75, 100 names. So the bottom line is you need to choose your 5 locations wisely. Your chances of being selected at the popular office I just mentioned are probably pretty low, but a 1 in 10 chance at a more remote office is pretty darn good. So maybe split your locations up, maybe a couple you really want, and then a couple that might have fewer applicants. This is kind of a tough one because since this hasn't been in effect very long, it's kind of hard to know what the best strategy is. Okay, so on to your resume. In USA Jobs, you can upload a resume that you've developed, or you can use the internal resume builder. Really, either is fine, but just as a note, a more professional looking PDF that you design and upload will probably be easier on the eyes for the MIC. But we do suggest that you at least click through the resume builder so that you can see what kind of information it says that you should include. So for that resume builder, you start by giving it a name. And once that's done, you can start adding work experience. Now, within each work experience, you provide the pertinent data such as location, your position title, salary, how long you worked there, as well as your duties and accomplishments and skills. And as you can see on this slide, it's just one box where you can add your duties, accomplishments, and skills. And you can't really add bullets. You can't format it very well. So that's why sometimes the PDF is better. Once the work experience is complete, you can add your education and then other information such as training, languages, organization, affiliation, publications, awards, leadership experience, just about anything you can think of. So this is the kind of stuff that it suggests you put in your resume. So as you're developing one, if you're doing one on a PDF separately, these are the kinds of information that you can add. So some things to include in your resume. Since this is an intern position, go ahead and include all of your jobs. They provide an insight to your character. Now, for example, maybe you wanted your meteorology degree and you were not above working as a janitor or a pooper scooper or whatever to earn the money needed to pay for your classwork. As well, add the timeline of your work experience during and after school. Now, if there are gaps in your timeline, you might want to be ready to explain them. For example, you had a child and decided that you wanted to be a stay-at-home parent for a while. And then once you're in, you can get rid of all the non-meteorology stuff. But for now, go ahead and include them all. Within the resume builder itself is a question for each work experience. Is it okay to contact your current supervisor? Just as a note, it looks really bad and raises a lot of eyebrows if you say no. When it comes to your references, please ask permission before listing individuals. You can include personal references like a neighbor or a community leader or a pastor or something, but we do suggest limiting this to only one. So other things to include, any meteorology related experience that you have, it doesn't matter what it is or where it came from, go ahead and include it. Definitely include leadership and team activities, even if it's not meteorology, such as a student body leadership or fraternity or sorority leadership, things like that. Any awards and accomplishments you have, including scholarships, or like if you saved the mayor's cat and got a key to the city, go ahead and include it. Professional societies. Laura will touch on this later, and this is of course an AMS webinar, but the AMS and NWA are excellent ways to expand your network and the breadth of your experiences. So if you're not a member, join now. And naturally, any community service or volunteer work. So some more resume tips here. Please don't use paragraphs. Bullets are much easier on the eyes. Imagine an MIC trying to read paragraphs in 150 plus resumes. That's really tough. Organize your details by subject and reverse chronologically. And I talked about this earlier, but go through the questions in the application and find a way to include an experience or justification for every question in there. And please spell check. That should be a no-brainer, but apparently it's not. Very, very important. Try to find a current Weather Service employee somewhere to review your resume and application, because they may have some insights and tips and tricks that would be more specific to you. If you don't know someone in the Weather Service, use your network. Find somebody who does know someone. And also important, know that for the Weather Service, shorter isn't necessarily better. You really don't want to go overboard, of course, but a 1 or 2 page resume just will not cut it. There's not enough information about you and the things that you've done. However, you could consider uploading a full resume and then maybe a corporate or summary resume for easy reference, so that they can go back and look, oh, this person did this, and just look real quick. Now is the time to add to your resume. Get experience, get lots of it. There are several programs out there. The most lucrative of these is the Pathways program, which is a federal student internship. The Hauling Scholarship is fantastic. Find a way to volunteer at a WFO. If nothing else, be a teaching assistant, or at least find some sort of research project to get involved in. Leadership is huge. Demonstrate that you can lead. It can be kind of tough, especially in college, because you're all competing for a limited number of jobs or financial resources. But one of the best and most rewarding things you can do is to help others accomplish their goals. And as a side note, this is a really small field. You never know who might be your boss someday, so do not burn bridges. Be helpful, be a leader, and check your ego at the door, please. Okay, so on to some of that additional information you need. First of all, your transcripts. You need one for every degree completed, not high school, of course. Even if your degree is incomplete, include what you have so far. Your cover letter. Now, this is optional, and you're only allowed 1 per application. So if you're using USA Jobs, you need to be generic. One strategy applicants is using is to snail mail a cover letter to each individual MIC if they're applying for that office. Some MICs like them, some can take them or leave them, but what they can do is they can provide some insight into you as a person. And I guarantee you, every MIC is asking, why does this person want to work at my office? Do they have something to really offer to the team, or do they just want a job? And then there's the other stuff, which can include educational requirements, letters of references, things like that. Please note that only 1 other document is allowed. So if you have multiple documents you'd like here, you might need to combine them into 1 PDF. I'll talk more about the educational requirements in just a minute. If you're bidding on a job through a non-competitive process, such as veterans preference, you need to make sure you upload the proper documents for that. And as a note for everyone, non-competitive applicants are automatically put on the top of the panel, which may cut some of the bottom folks out. But in my opinion, for veterans especially, they've served our country, that's perfectly fine. Okay, so for those educational requirements, sometimes your transcript isn't clear. Maybe, for example, you took a physics lab, but it's not listed separately. Maybe it's listed as physics with like a 4-hour course, a 2-hour, maybe a 3-hour course itself, and a 1-hour lab, but it doesn't list it separately. Well, you have to have your physics lab listed. Or maybe it just says Meteorology 3 instead of thermodynamics. So if in doubt, add a document detailing how you meet the criteria. Or maybe you actually don't meet the requirements with the courses in your actual degree. Maybe you never took remote sensing. Maybe your degree doesn't say that you have to take differential equations. It's important to remember that just because you have a degree doesn't necessarily mean you meet the requirements. Now, most degrees do, but it's incumbent on you to make sure you meet the requirements. So what we suggest is to add a document explaining how you meet the requirements. Spell it out for workforce management so that they can't miss it at all. Here's an example using the courses at Georgia Tech, again, spelling it out. This is how I meet the 2 hours of remote sensing of the atmosphere and or instrumentation, and then how many hours are completed. Again, this is just an example. You can do this any way you want, but we do suggest that you go ahead and do that. Note that you also need to specify in your resume that you're a U.S. citizen, and if necessary, that you're registered for the Selective Service. Now, we talked a little bit about the panel earlier. Again, the panel is approximately the top 10% of applicants. On USA Jobs, after you bid, your status will eventually change to eligible or not eligible, and then finally either to referred or not referred. If you're referred, congratulations, that's great. This is what it looked like a few years ago for me. You might get an email that your status has changed to, but not always. After you've made the panel, then it's time for the interview if the MIC chooses to do one. Different MICs do it differently, but generally between 5 and 10 candidates are interviewed. Adam Roser, who's presenting at 2:30 Eastern Time, he'll have more information on this. But just to give you a quick idea of some possibilities, you might have a basic phone interview or a more presentation-intense video teleconference. It might be just with the MIC, or it might be with an entire selection team. You might do one interview, or you might do a series of them as they narrow down candidates. You might just have an oral interview, or there could be written questions or even a presentation as part of the requirements. Again, every MIC is different. Okay, so what happens if you're selected? Well, if so, you'll get an email from Workforce Management with the tentative offer. It'll look something like this. And note that you'll have a limited amount of time from the receipt of that email to respond, accepting or rejecting the tentative offer. Please follow the instructions carefully. And in this case, you had 2 work days. Please do follow those instructions. We highly recommend that you do not bid on a job you're not willing to take. Sometimes maybe you're accepted at another office and then you get an offer from a different office. So in that case, it's okay to reject it, but please don't just willy-nilly change your mind. It's a lot of work for an MIC and the selecting team and Workforce Management to go through all of this. After you accept, you'll receive another email from Workforce Management with the formal offer letter, and this may take some time. And then, of course, there's paperwork, lots and lots of paperwork, security paperwork, and all sorts of fun stuff. And one last quick digression, because there are some positions out there or coming that I want to highlight. There is a mass intern bid expected soon, and seriously, it could be tomorrow. As a note, it does include 4 intern vacancies at the Atlanta office, so just sort of putting that plug out there. Also highlighting the Pathways internship. These are paid internships for current students, and they do include benefits, and one just opened up yesterday. You'll note that it's a GS7, so they're targeting grad students, and there are 2 positions, both of these at the Meteorological Development Lab in Silver Spring, Maryland. Okay, I know that was a lot of information, and I'm sure you'll all figure out the process as you go through it, but I'm happy to answer any questions if we have time at the end or offline. And for now, though, I'm going to pass it back to Laura to talk about the bad news.
Okay, thanks, Trisha. So unfortunately, we needed to include some of the harsh realities here. A lot of these statistics were published from John Knox back in 2008, and they still hold true today. And the portion of this talk actually came from an invited presentation where we went to a local university, and Trisha and I spent some time briefing them on ways that they could make themselves look a little bit more competitive in entering the workforce. And so it was kind of striking to look at these statistics and really see what the chances are of being able to enter federal employment with a bachelor's degree. So we wanted to share that with you. So the estimated number of bachelor's degrees earned each year in meteorology or atmospheric science or some kind of related physical science degree is greater than 600. Now the estimated number of entry-level bachelor's meteorology positions every year is only less than 300. So you can see that there's a big discrepancy there. So the estimated number of entry-level National Weather Service positions that are open per year, we have already brought this up a couple of times. It's ranging between 25 and 50. So the harsh reality in this is that your chance of obtaining entry-level meteorologist position anywhere immediately following graduation, if you're only looking at the numbers, it's about 50%. But in reality, it's less than 25%. And the reason is because you're competing with people with higher level degrees, master's degrees, PhDs, people who are exiting the private sector and wanting to enter the National Weather Service, and those who have completed military service. So the take home point here is that more than 75% of you will either have to make a choice of leaving the field to pursue other options of employment or go to graduate school to try and make yourself look a little bit more competitive. So your chance of obtaining entry-level National Weather Service position immediately following your graduation with a bachelor's degree, again, by the numbers, because of the number of positions open each year, it's only about 5%. But in reality, it's basically 0. And again, you're competing with other people that have higher academic qualifications, military personnel, and private sector experience. So in order to be offered a position at the National Weather Service, you're going to have to set yourself apart. And you can do that by pursuing a graduate degree, doing a short stint military service, or going to the private sector and taking advantage of what that sector has to offer. So what Trisha and I did was we looked at 2 mass bid panels, and then they were from 2014 and from 2016. And the combined total of positions that were filled from this was 73. So roughly in that time frame, I believe we were seeing 1,600 unique applicants for those 2 mass bids. And so when you take the applicants and you weed out the top 10% to create the panel, we're talking anywhere between 140 and 160 applications that these hiring officials were having to go through. Now, because we mentioned it before with the gender distribution, one of the interesting things here is that the gender distribution of the panel is about 86%. So it's actually tends more male than the gender makeup of the National Weather Service. And those selected, it was roughly about the same, closer to about 80% male and 20% female. Now, if we look at just the education background of these applicants, you can see that the blue outlined pie chart that's the diversity of the panel. So those are people who got weeded out. Top 10% of the applicants, they may or may not have gotten an interview. And you can see that less than half of them just had bachelor's degrees. About half of them had a master's degree, and about 10% had some additional graduate work. They may not have had a master's degree completed, or they had a PhD. So you can see those kind of broken out there. Now, as far as those that were actually selected, over half of them had a master's degree, and if you add in the PhD and the additional graduate work that helps them out, that's an additional 14% there. So 30% of these selectees had bachelor's degrees, and that was it. So if you further then broke that down, you could say, well, I'm top of my class. I'm the best forecaster in Weather Challenge. I am the best student coming out of my university. Couldn't I be the one that's competitive with just a bachelor's degree? So we then further broke it down. We pulled out only those 30% of people who made the panel who had a bachelor's degree. And we further looked at whether they had additional experience. So for example, whether or not they spent time in the private sector, did they volunteer at a National Weather Service office? Did they have a combination of those 2 things? Any military experience, any previous government paid work like a hauling scholar. We don't have the SCEP program anymore, but SCEP or Pathways, those were all other options. Maybe you worked in a government agency that wasn't the National Weather Service, but it was still government employment, or if you had research publications. And so the big thing here to note is the big black box area, that 11%. 11% of the people who applied with only a bachelor's degree didn't have anything additional to back up that academic career. And if you then look at those who were selected, that 0% that's above my pie chart, 0% of the people who had nothing but a bachelor's degree were selected for these 73 positions. And so you can see that there was a decent breakout of those people who had been in the private sector and volunteering. But and so the big take-home message here is, you know, government work or program experience, that holds a lot of weight, that carries a lot of weight in your resume. Even just coming in to a weather service office, introducing yourself, maybe doing some shadow shifts. You may not be able to completely commit to a volunteer position that comes in maybe a couple times a week or a couple times a month, but even coming in and shadowing a forecaster, that gets your name in the office and passed around a little bit. And these people can start to see that you really are passionate about your career. 20% had private sector experience, the other 10% had military experience, and so those again help you stand out. Now, if you looked at the experience of the entire panel, so not just those that had bachelor's degrees, but also those who had some graduate level work or master's work, you can see again it's about 11% of the entire panel, and 3% of that actually made it into the selection. So these could be people who had master's degrees or had taken some graduate level coursework, but that was it. They just had their academic career to show for them. And it's possible that they may have been selected, as Trisha mentioned earlier, at maybe a more rural office that had less competition. And so if you don't have the ability to pursue higher level education, a higher level degree, or getting some additional employment opportunities, then possibly try and leverage your opportunity there to bid on a position that might have less competition. So now what are your options? And so moving forward, again, you can pursue a graduate level degree, but money may be an issue or time may be an issue. You may be unable to pursue any kind of higher level education at a university that you'd like to. So that may not be an option for you. You may have the opportunity to join the military. You can go in, get some experience for a couple years, and then have veterans preference when you come out. You have the opportunity to seek other employment. Even if you have to leave the field of meteorology to work for an unrelated private sector company, that's something to put on your resume, but always be sure that you're going to your local AMS chapter meetings or you're visiting the Weather Service office every once in a while. It can help again with your networking and your visibility. And to that, make sure you're establishing and maintaining your network. So people, professors, visiting presenters that have come to your university or your organizations and presented, make sure that you're kind of keeping up with them. Stay in touch with those people. You need to step up your game. Again, I mentioned go to your local chapter meetings, AMS, NWA, and get involved. Volunteer. You may not be able to volunteer at a weather service office. It may be too far for you to drive, but there's probably some other local meteorology related field that would allow somebody to come in and shadow. Consider doing research, presenting at conferences or publishing in newsletters, not necessarily peer reviewed, but doing some kind of publication to show that you're researching and you're putting your name out there. Those are all things that can help you stand out. Be a model student. Again, Trisha mentioned this before. Check your ego at the door. These are all opportunities for you to kind of show yourself and display yourself as having good character and a team player, something that a National Weather Service office is looking for. Be a leader. It does not matter what your position title is or how well you're doing in your classes. You can still be a leader in how you're relating to other people, and so that's always important. I've found in this field that there's basically nobody that is employed by the Weather Service or even in a private company, a meteorology position, that isn't passionate about their job. No one stumbles into meteorology just by accident. And so we are all passionate about this field, and make sure you're incorporating that passion into what you're doing. Make sure you have a backup plan. For those of you who are still in a university program, consider a double major or a minoring in with a bachelor's degree. Any kind of foreign language, programming skills. If you have the opportunity to pursue something related like civil engineering, something along those lines, those can always be helpful. You could always pursue a related field for your master's degree. It may not be meteorology. It could be a master's in emergency management. That would be considered really desirable right now. Other things that you could pursue, like I mentioned, business degrees, engineering, administration or communications, social science and psychology, and understanding how people respond to warnings that are issued by the Weather Service. That is a big topic of discussion right now. And so all these things can be utilized in a Weather Service office. So, you know, there's plenty of other things that you could look into. And the important thing is to get creative, help yourself stand apart from other people. Okay. So keep in mind, all meteorologists are meteorologists. It does not mean much. It's not going to be good enough just to be that best forecaster and weather challenge or the best student with the highest GPA. Being a good forecaster, a fantastic meteorologist is going to be the minimum coming into the Weather Service. And so you can set yourself apart. For those of you who have heard of PI, it stands for Performance, Image, and Exposure. And so you want to remember this as you move forward in pursuing these. Now, what is PI? So it's a corporate model for career advancement. You can see this pie chart here, where performance is the first thing. It's about 10%. And then you've got image and exposure. And so it is a balance of all these things and how you're presenting yourself. It's not what you know, and it's not who you know, it's who you know that knows what you know. And so that's one of the big take-home things for PI. Now, performance is going to be how you carry yourself or accomplish an action or how you're relating. And so that's your performance. It's only 10% of how you can network with other people. It's the first slice of pie. It's going to be your first taste. It's like when you taste something and you can tell immediately whether it's salty versus sweet. Your level of performance has to be up there. It has to be top notch, because it's your performance, that first 10%, that opens the door to the remaining 90%. Now, your image is the next 30%, and this is the nonverbal communication, your body language, your time, your gestures, so on and so forth. But then it also has a verbal communication component to it, how you present yourself, how your writing abilities, your speech, how you converse via email. And these days, it's how you're presenting yourself on social media and how you're relating to other people in that cyberspace. And so that's very important. And they also get an idea of your tone. Are you a more casual, relaxed person? Are you a little bit more formal? Are you constantly on the defensive? Are you an offensive type, aggressive type personality? And so those are all things that come from your image. But then the big one is exposure. So the exposure is your visibility you have inside and outside of an organization. So this is the one that has the greatest impact on your ability to advance in your career. So this is what informs others about your performance and your image. So those other 40% of what's making up you. And this process and result being wired in the network. So again, we can't say it more. Network, network, network. It is, again, it goes back to who you know that knows what you know. And through networking, that can get your name out there and make you look more competitive. It's important that you not wait until your 4th year to make post-graduation plans. Trisha and I, we're here to help. If your dream is to work for the Weather Service, if you don't want to speak with one of us, you can talk to your local National Weather Service office. They are always dealing with students. There is usually at least 1 or 2 people there that are really passionate about that next generation of meteorologists, not only entering the Weather Service, but entering the field as a whole. And so take the initiative, ask questions. Again, you can contact Trisha or myself. We are happy to provide feedback on your resume or ways that you can really help network yourself.
All right, thank you. Awesome talk. Can you guys tell that these 2 women have great communication skills, just like they talked about? This is a great overview. I would like to say that, you know, they're right. It's very, very competitive. But I always say that the best way to combat that competitiveness is to educate yourself on the process, on exactly what you need to do. And that talk was a great start at doing that. So thank you guys both. We do have 2 questions. So I'll open this up to both of you. The first question of the day is from Erin, and she says, in the past, I've had the same application for the same position referred and not referred. Why does something like this happen, and are there ways to combat this when applying?
So that's a great question. So right now, Erin, the way it's done, there's a series of questions that determines your eligibility, like questions like, have you left the Weather Service previously, or have you registered for the draft, things like that. If you have answered one of those questions in a way that kind of kicks you out of the potential candidates, then there's not much that can be done. And those are not questions where you can save the answers from application to application. So make sure that you go back and really review those. Now, if you have answered those questions identically for each of the applications, and you're still getting referred for one and not referred for the other, it usually is because of whoever is in workforce management and processing that application. And if it is a disqualification or a non-referral based on the interpretation of that individual processing it, so maybe they misunderstood something that was in your application. Remember, they are not National Weather Service forecasters, and so something you may have in there may make 100% sense for one person, and then the next set of applications, it doesn't make sense for them. You always then have the option in that case of going back and saying, I would like to be reconsidered. And so what they will do is they will go back and re-review your application. This is also where good networking helps, because if you have been able to connect with a meteorologist in charge and kind of make an argument for yourself that you're a qualified, very passionate, interested person for a job that's opening at their office, and they know to expect your name, if they don't see your name on that panel, then you can contact them and say, look, I think there's an issue. How do I go about getting my application re-reviewed? And so they can actually be an advocate for you in helping that happen as well. Trisha, I'm not sure if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, it could also be that, say there's for one office you're bidding at, there's 500 applicants, so you might not make the panel there, but another office might only have 50 applicants and you might make the panel there. So it just depends on how many people are applying to which office and where you rank in those. It also depends on if there are veterans or others with like a disability, somebody who has a non-competitive application, they're automatically put ahead of you. So if they apply for one office and not another office, that may make the difference too. So it may have nothing to do with you personally, but everybody else instead.
Yeah, that's a great point, Trisha. That's what I was going to say as well. It probably has to do with the number of people applying. We have time for just one more. There are other questions here that I will work to give you a written response during the next talk. And if Trisha and Laura, you want to jump in on those as well, you can, as giving them written responses. The next one is, I'm a freshman majoring in meteorology. When should I begin to apply for an intern position or pathways? And that is from Amanda.
For an intern position, you really can't apply until you're a senior. They do allow you to apply maybe like 4 months before you graduate, as long as you're going to meet those graduation requirements, but they'd really rather you wait until after you've graduated. For a pathways position, it depends on how it's open. Like the example I showed was a GS7. Well, to bid on something at a GS7 level, you basically have to be in graduate school. So if there's something that's open at a GS3 or a GS4, then an undergraduate would be eligible for those. So you have to look at the GS level, and it will say in the application who is eligible and how many years of college you have to be able to apply for it. So look closely at the announcement.
All right, great.
I have two things to add really fast.
Sure.
In other government agencies, Pathways is utilized for people who are currently in school or recent graduates. Right now, the Weather Service is not using the recent graduate option, but you may be able to find a meteorology position that's outside of the Weather Service in a government agency that does utilize that option if you have already graduated. And then the second is, don't forget about the Hauling Scholar. Hauling Scholar is still a paid opportunity, and you typically would want to apply for those after your sophomore year. I'm not sure if you heard me. That would be after your for the summer following your sophomore year or your junior year of college.
It says, no examples of non-NWS employees coming into management, but now I've seen advertisement of all senior positions above forecaster as internal only. That seems to create a barrier for meteorologists who might want to either leave the NWS and gain experience in another sector, which could then benefit the NWS later, or folks wanting to apply for a position in NWS from outside the agency who might have a lot to contribute but are overqualified or don't want to start as an intern. I've seen this with many students and meteorologists that I talk with. Do you always have to enter the NWS as an intern?
No, you certainly don't. The science and operations officer at our office, for example, he actually has his bachelor's and master's degrees in mechanical engineering, was then a high school math teacher for a while, then went to OU to get his PhD in meteorology, worked for CAPS for several years, and then came in as a SUE. So it really just depends on how the position is advertised. For the offices that are going to be a little bit more competitive, you're probably only going to see internal postings. But for an office that might be a little bit more remote, where they might have problems finding enough qualified applicants, it's possible that they might open up, especially SUE positions, as open to the public. I can't think off the top of my head, and maybe Ryan might have maybe you might have a different opinion, or I know Adam's on, he's in the Weather Service as well, but I can't think of any WCM positions that I've ever seen open to the general public. I've only seen those open internally. But SUEs, yes, because of the science and technical background, I've seen several of those open to the public. Like I did mention before, you might have to look at a more remote office. So instead of being a GS-14 at a bigger office, you might come in as a GS-13. But you would not necessarily have to start as an intern. That said, we're seeing more and more interns that have their PhDs coming in, or people who started working on a PhD, then got an intern position. It's like, well, let me go ahead and finish this. So they end up getting their PhD through the process. I know that that's kind of rough to go from a PhD to an entry-level intern position. Hopefully, as they change the intern position, that'll improve at least your own internal thoughts of what the intern position means. You know, I'm not just an intern. But it's really remarkable to see people who have their PhD who are humble enough to go ahead and bid on intern jobs. It's usually pretty quick that they move on up. So as long as, like I mentioned before, as long as you can check that ego at the door, it's really only a couple of years of putting up with the quote unquote intern position, or only being a GS5 or 7 or 9 or whatever it is. But yeah, there are a few positions that are open to the public, especially at NCEP. There are more NCEP center positions that are open to the public, and Dr. Fisher might have some thoughts on that too in her presentation later on. So yeah, don't count yourself out of the Weather Service just because you have a PhD and maybe you don't want to start over an entry-level position. First of all, if the Weather Service is what you really want to do, you might have to consider it. But second, just you might just have to wait for the right position to open and be willing to go somewhere maybe a little bit less desirable.
Yeah, those are good thoughts.
Yeah, as an intern, I can say that
Go ahead,
it's
Adam.
totally fine. Yeah, so as an intern, kind of what she was saying, like I think it's totally, definitely livable where I am. Like I'm living in Southern California where it's, very expensive. And so we're kind of, working our way up year after year with the salary and all of that. So, you work your way up pretty quick. It's not like you're at the, one salary forever. So it's definitely doable.
Yeah, one thing, Trisha, I was wondering, when it says internal only, is that internal to the Weather Service or internal to the federal government?
Federal government. So
Okay.
people who are in the federal government anybody in the federal government would be able to apply. Now, while there are other agencies that have meteorologists, there aren't that many. It's a bigger deal for like if you're bidding on a hydrologist position. So maybe you have some experience in the USGS and you've got your degree in civil engineering or hydrology or meteorology or whatever. So there, we see a lot of that you might see some Corps of Engineers or USGS folks go back and forth into the Weather Service on the hydro side of the house. There's not a whole lot of I mean, like Brandon at FEMA, he actually was a meteorologist for the Weather Service, and then he jumped ship to go to FEMA, or whatever you want to call what he did. So there is some movement within the federal government, but because the Weather Service has most of the meteorology positions in the federal government, that it's going to be 9 times out of 10 a Weather Service hire. It's very rare to get an internal position where you get somebody coming in from a different government agency as a meteorologist.
Yeah, and I wanted to say too, on the subject of the PhD, we've got a lot of students out there that have heard, maybe bachelor's isn't enough. A lot of the new hires have master's degrees. Now I'm hearing PhD stuff. Do I need a PhD? I don't think that's the case. They are much more rare hire. It seems at the moment that master's degree is the sweet spot where you're going to make a lot of panels, but we don't see a ton of PhDs. They are becoming a little more frequent, but certainly a PhD is not required for a Weather Service job.
Yeah, someone hired just 6 months ago. I can definitely attest to this. I don't even have my full master's. I'm about halfway, 3/4 of the way through with it. So I think if you at least are, starting your master's and all of that, you're in a pretty good shape. But PhD, yeah, I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, and a lot of times it just is to get through that initial HR stage a lot of times. And so keep in mind, too, that if you're not really research oriented, that's not your game, that's not what you want to do, but you're like, oh, I need a master's to try to make myself more competitive. There are several programs that offer non-thesis masters. While it is good to go through that experience, you gain a lot of computer programming skills, critical thinking skills. I do recommend it, but it is not required. So if you have a non-thesis master's, you basically do the coursework, you get your master's, and then to the HR person going through all of the resumes, a master's is a master's. And so, that's one thing to consider as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm working on. Master's in Emergency Management, non-thesis. So I'll kind of touch upon that in my talk as well.
Excellent.
Good thing, Ryan, and we didn't talk about this in our presentation.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just saying we didn't really talk about this in our presentation, but if you only have a bachelor's degree, the intern positions right now are open usually as 579s. If you only have your bachelor's degree, you're not even eligible to bid on the 9. If you're in like the top 10% of your graduating class, then maybe you're eligible to bid on a 7. But most bachelor students can only apply for the GS5 level. Once you have some master's experience, you can apply for the 7. Once you have your master's degree or some PhD work, you can apply for the 9. So that just, now, even if you have your PhD, still apply at the 5 level, because you never know, you might be on the top of the 5 and the bottom of the 9 panel, depending on who else is applying. And so you might only get that GS5 offer, but still apply for all of the different levels that you're eligible for.
Yeah, that's a good point. And another thing about that is if you're applying and you're making all of the panels for each of the levels, then you're knocking a competitor off. So it's a way to kind of maybe winnow down the field a person or two. And I see your screen, Katie. We built in some time for some overruns, so feel free to go ahead until about 5 after 1.
Okay, very good. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Katie Webster, and I work as one of our 3 meteorologists at North Carolina Emergency Management. So I work with the state, and this is definitely a job that I happened to come across several years ago. I've been working here just over 5 years, and since then we've really built out our meteorology capability. And meteorologists in state emergency management is something that is fairly new and evolving. Each state handles it just a little bit differently, but I really appreciate the opportunity to tell you how it works here in North Carolina. So let me give you a little bit overview about North Carolina Emergency Management, and then you can better understand where we fit in. So we are a part of the North Carolina Department of Public Safety. We're the Division of Emergency Management within the Department of Public Safety, and we have our director's boss is the Secretary of Public Safety, and he reports directly to the governor. So we have about 185 to 200 employees. We can ramp up to nearly 300 employees following a disaster, and that's the case that we're at now with Hurricane Florence and a little bit of Michael as well. And where those extra positions come from are we bring in those who have been retired or reservist positions to help us with some of that recovery work, whether it be through individual assistance or public assistance, whatever that may be. So we can ramp up pretty quickly. And then as time passes, within a year or two, that tends to go back down and deflates, and we're back down to our 180 to 200 people. We have 6 facilities located across the state. I'm located at our state EOC, which is where you see the picture, but we also have 3 branch offices. So we divide the state up into thirds. We have our western branch, we have our central branch, and our eastern branch. Each branch has a branch manager, and each branch is divided up into areas, is what we call, and that's anywhere from 5 to 7 counties that have an area coordinator. And the area coordinator works directly with the county emergency manager. So our primary customer that we help to support is county emergency managers. We are not a first response agency. We instead help county governments when their resources become overwhelmed. So the key thing with emergency management is that it starts and ends at the local level, and the state comes in when counties become overwhelmed, just like FEMA will come in when our state capabilities become overwhelmed. So the key areas for emergency management are planning, preparedness, training, response, and recovery and mitigation. And the neat thing about being a meteorologist in state emergency management is that we get to help with all aspects of these, whether it be through trainings or exercises or real life activations. We have a place because as we all are well aware, weather affects everything, and many of the events that we activate our state EOC for are for natural hazards, primarily tropical and winter weather. So we all know that we do have the National Weather Service, and we're very fortunate to have really good working relationships with all 7 of our Weather Service offices that serve North Carolina. But you may wonder, why are there in-house meteorologists working at state emergency management? Because we do have the National Weather Service. Well, where we find our role is that our state senior staff for emergency management have access to us 24/7, and we can provide on-demand briefings. So our audience is a little bit different. We focus more so on emergency managers who may need to know certain aspects of the event. So we take information from the National Weather Service, and then we're able to I won't say sift that down, but repackage that in a way to support our customer. So the main goal of our positions is to provide critical weather data and interpretation in decision-making situations to the state EOC. So one way that we do that is being able to provide on-demand briefings. So we advise our senior staff and oftentimes the governor's office during hazardous weather. The pictures that you see here on the bottom left is most recently for Hurricane Florence. So what typically happens is when our state EOC activates, the governor and his staff will come into our EOC. One of the meteorologists on staff will provide a weather update to the governor and to other members of his cabinet to prepare for the press conferences that are also held at our office, which is what you see on the right. So as I mentioned, we support all phases of emergency management: preparedness, response, mitigation, and recovery. And we do that through creating tailored products for emergency managers across the state, not only at the state level, but also the county level as well. And we place a focus on the entire state, a statewide jurisdiction, as opposed to just a specific set of counties, which is where we work closely with our National Weather Service offices, because we take all of that information and compile it into a statewide picture, since what we do is moving resources from the west to the east. It doesn't focus so much on county to county, but more so a much greater distance. And so through that, we will provide input to the situation reports or an incident action plan for events which impact our operations. We can assist in media inquiries or requests. We assist in reviewing press releases. We have a presence in our social media posts, which is something that is an evolving science, as we all know, of how do you best capture and how do you represent your agency on social media. And also in the recovery phase, we will assist in constructing FEMA declaration requests. If our recovery chief needs help in putting some information down about how the event played out, we will work with our National Weather Service partners to help document that so that we make sure our declaration request
Did we lose your audio, Katie? Katie, I can't hear you. There you go. I think you're back.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So our job is to analyze the available information during an incident, extract out what's critical to the success of the mission, whatever that may be, and communicate that in a way that is easily understandable to the emergency management community. Our primary customers is the State Emergency Response Team, also called the CERT team. So representatives from every state agency that may be tasked to respond are part of this team. Key players are Department of Public Safety, State Highway Patrol, North Carolina National Guard, Department of Transportation, OEMS, which is our Office of Emergency Medical Services, DHHS, which is the Health and Human Services, and Department of Agriculture. So in an event, when we activate our state EOC, key partners from all of these agencies and more will come to our EOC and provide support in however long our activation lasts, and they have that ability to task their agencies with response with whatever the resource requests are. But we also have secondary customers as well, which is the County Emergency Management, FEMA, DOD, USDOT, other federal agencies. We cannot forget our disaster relief agencies. We have good working relationships with the Salvation Army, all of our VOAD, which is the Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, all of those partners who would provide mass feeding after an event or help to do some muck and gut following a disaster. We have state, federal, and local politicians, and of course the general public, and that gets back to the social media realm. And as I mentioned, this is an evolving science and how we best serve and what our niche is here in emergency management. But what we do know is that weather impacts nearly everything that we do, whether it be that's what you're responding for or that affects how you are responding. So we really, our job looks a little bit different each day. So things that emergency managers want to know, and as I mentioned, we help support county emergency managers when their resources become overwhelmed. What they want to know is the threats and the impacts and the locations and the timing and the confidence. They want to know what is going to impact them, when, and for how long, and what does that mean for them. And one thing that I've included here is a spaghetti plot, which can kind of be contradictory to what you would think you wanted county emergency managers looking at. But I wanted to put this in here to remember to talk a little bit about this. So, um, spaghetti plots in the realm of emergency management can be a sticky situation because we don't want people relying too much on this, but obviously it's out there and available to the general public. And as we've all seen, these tend to go spread very quickly when we're looking at an approaching storm. And what we find ourselves doing as meteorologists in emergency management is using these tools that people already have access to and educate them, educate those who may not be scientifically savvy on how the best way to use these are. It's not about keeping people from using these, but it's educating them on how they can best be used. So while this may not be the best product to look at ahead of a hurricane, we try to defer everyone to the National Hurricane Center since we do use National Weather Service products, but this helps us in planning. So they want to know what the probability is, what our confidence is. And so we try to use these tools smartly. What they don't want to know is a lot of what we learn in school and what we're used to talking about within our fairly closed community, whether it be synoptic or mesoscale weather or climate change or sea surface temperatures and charts and numbers. They don't want to know that. And above all else, what they especially don't want to know is what I think their course of action should be. That is not our role in emergency management. It's not to tell them what their course of action should be, but rather give them the information they need to make the decision themselves. And that's ultimately because they know what their thresholds are, and you never realize how much plays into a decision, like politics and like money and like times of year if you're talking about an evacuation. So you have to know, we have to learn what it is they want to know and what our realm that we stay away from is. So I think I mentioned that we actually only use National Weather Service forecast products to support the state emergency response team. That helps to establish a common operating picture between state and federal agencies, and it helps with the simplicity as well. County governments are not required to use National Weather Service forecasts, which is what makes it a little bit of a tricky thing because we could all be speaking off of a different sheet of music. So we at the state help to only use National Weather Service products to alleviate at least some of that. And some of the things that we run into, especially ahead of a hurricane or a big time weather event, is the differences in opinions on what may happen based on what people's opinions are. History plays into it. If we have a county emergency manager who has lived in the county all of his life and is determined that hurricanes always turn out to sea before we get here, we have to figure out how we counter that and educate them on what the situation is and provide the information that they need while also being sensitive to the decisions that they have to make. As we are very well aware, there's a lot of weather noise when a disaster is about to happen. We have the Weather Channel that travels. We have models that may or may not be wrong. We have blogs that say that we're all going to die if we don't do something. And all of this are things that we're trying to balance. And we continue to get better as a team at anticipating what questions we may have and anticipating what weather noise we may be encountering and being able to combat that ahead of time, whether it be through briefs to our senior staff or emails or just some basic education on what products are available, what they say and what they don't say, and making sure that we are very much in line with our state and federal partners on forecasts and actions and what actually needs to happen. And contrary to what I thought when I first started, there's more to emergency management than helicopter rescues and photo ops. There are political decisions. There's money related to it. There is people going off of what they need. each disaster is a little bit different in how we handle it, but we definitely get into a rhythm of what we can anticipate the questions being. So conflicting weather predictions and other non-weather concerns can cause emergency managers to make delayed and less than optimal decisions. So it's our job to ensure a common operating picture is maintained so that does not happen. So that's a little bit about our concept of operations and what we do. I wanted to talk a little bit about what our day-to-day looks like. And honestly, it can be a little bit different depending on the time of year. In blue sky days, we use our platform that we've built up over the past couple of years, and we want to make sure that everyone remains situationally aware of weather, whether that be during blue sky days or during hazardous weather. So we send out a daily weather update each day, regardless of the weather type, and it changes based on what group we send it to. So some days, if it's really nice weather, we would do a 7-day forecast, or maybe a weekend weather outlook, or even some fun weather related things like the summer solstice or the eclipse. We send out that things because we want people to know that we are here and that we are a reliable source of information when weather becomes a little more complicated. So we try to maintain that communication with our county partners and our CERT partners, and anyone can be on these distribution lists. We have anything from law offices to county emergency management to hospitals, and you never really know how many people look at this information until one day you don't send it for whatever reason, and then a lot of emails come saying, hey, are you going to send a weather update today? But that's what we kind of do in more blue days. In hazardous weather, we kind of shift gears, and our state EOC activates. Usually, the focus shifts to us, at least for several days, especially if it's a weather event. And we work with our National Weather Service offices and the Hurricane Center and our Hurricane Liaison team to make sure that we are in line with whatever the forecast says, whether it be for hurricanes or severe weather or winter weather. And we spend a lot of time making weather graphics to send out that are tailored to emergency managers and some of our state emergency response team partners. And what we try to do, as you can see here in the bottom left, is take a statewide approach. So we try to combine the forecast and lay it out on a statewide view so that our decision makers know where the biggest impact will be and how they need to adjust their response posture to meet the anticipated needs of the counties. For example, with the expected snowfall amounts, if they need to move trucks from Greenville over to Asheville, this state picture allows them to know that, as opposed to just driving down on Greenville or another specific area. And remembering back to what I told you about what emergency managers want to know, they want to know the timing, they want to know the impact. So we try to make sure that we include that. And in terms of our threat levels, as you can see in the upper left, we try to mirror that of the National Weather Service. And sometimes the offices differ from event to event, but we try to mirror that so that there is one common voice. The picture may look a little bit differently, but the information is exactly the same. And a lot of time is just regurgitated in a different format. And so this prompts action. On our part, it informs some of the trigger points for emergency management senior staff, and it gives people something to work off of. So that actually concludes my brief, and I'm certainly very happy to take any questions, and thank you for allowing us the time to speak on this today.
All right, thank you, Katie. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the question box down there. If you're able to address them to all so everybody can see them, that would be great. As you can see, Katie and I have the same meteorology degree, and it's a very different job. And so part of the reason I wanted to get Katie in here talking is that a lot of times with operational meteorology, you may hear about the weather service and things like that, but you don't hear about these other things that you can get into. And so it really is, a different job, but it is also the same job in many ways as well. A lot of different avenues. And one thing I'd like to point out is that North Carolina may be different from other states and how they work. So look in your home states to see what the setup is. Do they employ meteorologists? Do they not? How does it work? Because everybody's a little bit different there with how it's run.
Absolutely, Ryan. And And we see from when we look at our neighboring states how it's handled a little bit differently. That's absolutely the case, and especially across all hurricane-prone states, programs are set up a little bit differently, not just the weather piece, but also emergency management structure overall. And one thing that I did want to mention is a little bit about our schedule, because I feel like that is definitely a something different between you and I. So day to day, we are 8 to 5, and it's a state job, so we have the typical benefits, but very much outside of hazardous weather, we are routine Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 jobs. When our state EOC activates, and especially days ahead of that, if we are anticipating hazardous weather, our schedule changes a little bit. We do not go 24/7, as in our weather staff. The EOC is manned 24/7, and we may have staff here overnight. But because we serve county emergency managers and they cannot safely operate when it's dark outside, especially if you have a winter storm or a hurricane, we have found that our best strategy is to front load our weather support during times when the county is out and moving, so basically in daylight. So we may stretch our hours, we may work some long days for an extended period of time, but day to day, we do not have shift work outside of just an occasional, we need to send a weather update over the email because we're watching a tropical system, or like, for example, yesterday we stayed late to provide some severe weather support for election day. It's kind of a hit or miss thing, which is certainly different than some of the other areas where you may find a role in meteorology.
That's a great point, especially on the schedule. If you have a family, it can be much more conducive to, getting to spend a lot more time with them, which is definitely one of the negatives of the rotating shift work in the weather service. That's a good point. I wanted to ask too, you heard in the last talk how complicated, I'm sure you know how complicated the process is for hiring in the weather service. Did you find hiring the process was shorter or easier for the state EM, or was it about the same?
So it can vary depending on how many positions are open with state government. We like to say that we move at the speed of state government. It certainly is not guaranteed to be any faster, but we have tried to make improvements overall as an agency to make it faster. So a position will post, and that is found on our North Carolina jobs website along with any other state job. So you filter down through emergency management and find whatever you're interested in. So a position will typically be posted for at least 2 weeks, sometimes a little bit longer, just depending on if the position is currently vacant or if someone is anticipated to retire, that kind of thing. So it's at least open for several weeks, if not 30 days. And you make an online profile, which seemed to be very similar to the USA Jobs. You make an online profile with North Carolina Jobs website, and you submit your profile, and then the period will close. And after that, it is very much up to our department HR, which is outside of our division, to filter those packages and get them to the hiring supervisor. And that can take anywhere from 2 weeks to a month and a half. It really has seemed to vary. Once that time passes, the hiring supervisor will get the top 10 most quote unquote qualified candidates based on keywords and the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are posted with each job posting. So if you ever were to apply, I would encourage you to really focus on the knowledge, skills, and abilities and linking your profile to what it says the position requires. When the hiring manager gets the top 10 qualified packages, it's really up to them on how quickly they go through it, which usually that's usually pretty speedy. And depending on the number of qualified candidates they feel like they have, they can go back and ask for more packages to review. Sometimes they need to, and sometimes they feel pretty comfortable with what they have. And then interviews are scheduled. So overall, that can take anywhere from 2 to 4 months. So when we interview people, we say, we hope to try to educate them on where we are in the process, whether it be we have 2 more weeks of interviews or you're the last interviews. We will make our recommendation, try to help manage those expectations. But it can certainly be on the spans of months before that person were to hear anything. most everyone that I've interviewed or participated on an interview panel with, the supervisor will give them their card and say, you know, we're not really, there's only a certain part of this process that we're in charge of. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions along the way, or you want to check the status of where we're at in the process, because the HR department who filters our applications are also the ones who filter it for all of state government, and that gets pretty large at any given time. So it can span, you know, 2 to 4 months. That's not uncommon.
So it sounds like there's still red tape, but maybe not quite as much as the federal government, which makes sense. Katie's email is there if you want to reach out to her on the screen. We do have one question from Caitlin, it looks like. Let me get back to my questions here. Do you need an emergency management minor or major to be able to work as a meteorologist in emergency management?
No, you do not. So we have 3 staff, me and 2 others. I do have my master's in emergency management, but honestly, that was because I was not ready to pay my student loans back at the time. So I needed a program that was online, and I had found interest in emergency management, though I was not in my current position yet. But the only thing that we require when we post a job for a meteorologist would be a meteorology degree. And that's a fairly new occurrence. In years past, before I started, it focused more on a natural hazards background. So we would get anything from beekeepers to prison guards to anything that they felt like they could connect themselves. But the only thing that we do put on there is a degree of meteorology, and there is no major or minor in emergency management required. What I would suggest, though, if you ever did apply or ever look to that, is utilize the FEMA online ICS courses, which is the independent study. If you Google FEMA independent study, you can find a long list of courses that you can take for free online, and that will allow you to front load your your application to show that while I may not have a formal education background in emergency management, I'm interested and I've taken the courses to know the terminology. And it just kind of, I think that could really boost your application. But to answer your question, no, it is not required. But those free online resources are available.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks, Katie. If you could hand control back over to me. There you go.
There it is. Oh, awesome. And I apologize, as Katie was finishing up, I got a mandatory restart on my computer, and it's going to restart no matter whether or not I like it in 18 minutes.
Okay.
Working under pressure here.
We'll deal with that, but you are the last talk before the break, so feel free to go over a little bit.
Awesome. Well, I won't be able to. I got 18 minutes, like I said.
Okay.
It's going to restart on me whether I like it or not, and I'll lose you. So yeah, this is kind of just to follow up a little more on what Katie was talking about in emergency management and getting in and finding your way in. I've been now in emergency management in some form or another, going on 20 some years. Worked in the weather service, worked at the state emergency management, now in FEMA, and I've always had interest from meteorologists about the field and emergency management opportunities, and I think there's a lot to be said about the opportunities and other ways to get that experience, as was Trish and Laura talking about, coming in with some other experience that can really give you a leg up. And I think emergency management is a great place. There might not be as much formality in it, and you might find a better way to get some of that experience, because it seems like there's always, unfortunately, disasters happening in emergency management. Back in the day, I had a former boss that joked they liked hiring meteorologists, and he hired a lot of them right out of school to work in the state. He thought that you know, the critical thinking skills that they came out with were important to have in emergency management, and the emergency management itself was easy to teach, but to have those critical thinking skills to make use of problem solving is learned through the meteorology program, believe it or not. And you know, I would agree. You know, I felt like I got experience in being a team player. A lot of times doing things in teams came about in meteorology for me to make through some of my classes, using, you know, being able to draw out or take something that's abstract and make it more concrete to solve problems, we're adept at doing, and sometimes using technology to solve problems, and how we can get at problem solving can be important. Another thing that meteorologists have going for them is they're familiar with disasters. They understand some of the vernacular and history, and having that as a way to kind of connect with emergency managers. So you can see there's some connection there. The other thing is there's parallel skill sets. In emergency management, that's one big group, but as Katie would attest to, when they open up their EOC, they have people from all over the health side, the health sector, transportation, communications, GIS. I saw some questions about GIS, social media, being able to do some analysis and planning. A lot of those skill sets that the meteorologists may have interest in parallel what emergency management needs. And we're also used to working in what I would like to call disaster mode, knowing and ramping up and getting ready for severe weather or inclement weather, and monitoring and having that situational awareness. Those are key things in emergency management that they do and look for. So there's some really unique things that meteorologists bring to the table because of that. Some of the folks that I know, I was rolling through my brain and memory banks of all those meteorologists I know that have made their ways into emergency management. They started off as maybe a planner like myself, a hazard planner, a social media person. There's state meteorologists out there more and more. The states are putting a lot of efforts towards having meteorologists being there day in, day out. Mitigation, Katie mentioned touching mitigation, but the planners and understanding that hazards role. Watch officers, I've known watch officers that started off as meteorologists that have found their way in doing more meteorology and emergency management. And GIS, definitely a skill set that we could see taking advantage of having some kind of a meteorologist who has that technical competence and that's used to working with a lot of computers and maps and data, assimilating that and making sense of it. And again, back to the critical thinking and the strategic planner, knowing how to work through problems and understand multifaceted issues and try to project out into the future, like forecast. That's what planners try to do. So there's a lot of those great roles. The one thing I think is kind of cool though is that in emergency management, a lot of times we start with the weather and many different fronts, whether it be our daily brief that we might get from someone or from the weather service, to how we plan, or when we're operating. Weather is setting the tone for quite a bit of what we do and what emergency managers react to and plan for. So this is just a little snippet from our comprehensive preparedness guide, one of those guides we put out to emergency managers on how to plan and be ready for disasters. That first or that second step, step 2, understanding the situation. This graphic doesn't really give credit to all those different steps in there, but that is a key part of planning, understanding the threats and hazards and assessing risk. If you can't do that right, everything else is going to be wrong. So, and that's where weather fits into emergency management, understanding that situation, understanding those threats the best they can for the communities or facilities that they might be dealing with. FEMA has a joke about being flexible, and I think that's, you also have to be flexible and if you're seriously looking at emergency management and have a degree in meteorology, leverage what you're good at and what you like to do to find your way in. You have to be flexible. You may have some great ideas or have some thoughts on what you want to do in emergency management. Key is be flexible at first. There might be some unique opportunities right in your backyard. As mentioned before, weather services can be few and far between locations wise, but your counties, many counties, especially in the southeast, and we're seeing them in the northeast, and many counties and municipalities have emergency management offices. Great places to get your foot in the door, volunteer your services. They may have jobs that are similar to what you're interested in that might be opportunities. If you like talking and training is a good one, and communicating. We have a lot of the skill sets that we practice, even writing, can be helpful for those. So be flexible on what you're going to do, and knowing that this could lead to gaining a greater social network, working with the National Weather Service possibly, and supporting them through emergency management, if National Weather Service or another higher federal service in emergency management might be what you're looking for. But starting at the local level or state level is a great way to do it, because you're gaining that experience. I know looking at resumes, seeing a local, someone who's worked at a local level or a county level and a state level, it's really good to see that breadth, because they understand what happens, because disasters happen at a local level. That's where it starts, in the response, in the planning. So, but having that experience is really key. So I would say try to be flexible as possible when you're trying to find your way in, getting that experience. It could be very informal on how you get your job. You could volunteer one day, and the next day you have a full-time job in leading up people or working in an EOC where there's staff needed. It's just a matter of fact, as we in emergency management, we have a lot of turnover. Disasters and some of this work can be very stressful. Also, you get a lot of experience pretty quick, so you can move up the ladder pretty quick. The next, I want to talk a little bit about what do you do now. Again, finding that local office support if you can. If you're doing more studies or any research, thinking about some of the emergency management issues out there. Becoming a subject matter expert to support at a local level, and just getting to know the weather field and operations, understanding how the Weather Service works, what private entities are out there, and how they all work together to meet that need of the weather, and cross training, having a lot of different skills in your toolbox to meet the need, I think is key to have, as Katie mentioned. So when you do try to sell yourself, of course now my computer doesn't want to do something, please hold. There we go. When you start talking about applying and what should your resume look like or anything like that, focus on your experience and skills that you're doing or what you've gained, and make sure it makes sense. If it's a job that's focused on communications, you want to really talk about what you did communications wise, as Laura and Trish mentioned. Make sure you might have to tailor these specifically and find what are those key things the hiring agency or that position is looking for, and try to sell yourself on those. Key on those experience that you know the game, you've been there, you've done it, and that's why I go back to being flexible and finding some kind of work or experience. And again, not too short, too long. Also, you want to be able to, when someone's looking at your resume or your experience, they should see some of those key words and not every single thing you've ever did in the position, but what are those key things that are applicable, that give you that experience, that were integral, that you would want to highlight if you're being interviewed. Every single training class you've ever taken might be good, but what about the ones that are applicable to this emergency management field or this communications or this GIS? So yeah, a tailored resume that's readable, that highlights those key things right up front, that has the information that's needed. Much easier to find a candidate that does that, as opposed to just a blanket resume that might hint at that this person might be the right person. You want almost that resume to be that one to say, hey, if this position's being hired out there, this is the resume, what this resume should look like, and here's how I can tailor those things I've done through my life, my career, my studies, my training to that, and really key on those. In the federal service, and I've seen in other announcements, when they have ideal candidate would have, make sure you highlight that. Make sure that so those HR folks that see your resume see that that you're an ideal candidate. If you have experience in working in emergency management, you better put it in there, but got to highlight it. You can't be buried in a bullet somewhere in a volunteer somewhere. And think about your other work you've done for any other agency, company work on it, and how it might apply to some of those general things like project management or communications or writing or working in a team. Don't discount some of that work. And that you know, they put out these pretty verbose statements, but what are they asking for here? And make sure you can sell yourself on some of those key things that you have. When it comes to emergency management, though, advanced degrees, there's a lot of them out there. If it gets you to those extra skills, whether it be like an emergency management degree or a GIS degree as you're working on in meteorology, I think that's good, especially if you have the drive for it, or if it's geared towards it. It can get you that experience, or even better if it's working with a agency doing some studies or work. Huge benefit if you can tie it down and you're working with other people. But experience in the workforce can really trump sometimes a bunch of letters at your name and your name. You want to see, as you're looking at, as mentioned, as you're looking at maybe hundreds of resumes, if there's someone who's, you know, maybe fresh out of school, that hasn't been in the workplace or in the EOC or somewhere similar, you might have a red flag. Whereas if someone say, oh wow, look, this person's done, you know, mentioned they had done some work during some big storm here or this event there, they're helping or supporting or being part of that. I think that could be huge, and just a testament that they kind of know what they're getting into. And again, when we talk about, especially in emergency management, even in the, you know, as long as if your degree is in a similar field, it could be, sometimes announcements could be earth sciences, which is huge. It could be geology or biology or meteorology or one of those, geography. If it's in a similar field, don't think that will disqualify you, especially if you have some kind of experience or work in an EM field. And again, going back to the being flexible, if you get a job that's close, take advantage of it. It'll get you closer. Find ways to, you know, spread your wings. I think when you get into emergency management, you'll find that it might not be the ideal job, but once they figure out you're a meteorologist, they're like, well, we could use you here. And oh, can you look at this? So I think that's where emergency managers sometimes say, oh, we can get a few different hats filled by hiring a meteorologist. So as I wind down here, with my computer about to restart, some thoughts, other thoughts on interviews, if you ever are talking with emergency managers in interviews, and it goes back to some of the stuff that Laura and Trish were saying, and Katie, be aware of the technical jargon and acronyms and models. It can really, it's crazy how many acronyms are duplicative and they mean totally different things. Don't come off too excited about bad weather or a disaster, or come off as a disaster junkie. It's a tough balance, a fine line to say you like disasters and like bad weather, and then you like to study them and you want to help support them. And be really clear on your intentions for getting into the EM field for yourself and for the hiring person. You know, are you there to save the world? Are you there to be a team player? Are you there to learn? Are you there to, you know, move up in the world of emergency management or gain more skills in? Think about that, because believe it or not, people can sometimes see through some of that when you're looking at resumes and interviewing a lot of people. How you phrase things and put these down, it can resonate. But be clear on your intentions. And it's okay. The question usually asked is, you know, why do you want to be in this job? You know, make sure your intentions are clear. Make sure you know why you're getting into it too. And don't oversell your weather prowess. As Katie mentioned, the Weather Service is their first go-to gal in this, and they are the ones that they're looking to first. And you could just be that support, that person to bring some meteorological SME-ness, subject matter expertness, or the person that can do those one-off briefings, or the person that connects them to the right person, which is more often than not. and being flexible, showing that you want to be a team player always gets very, very, very far. Being able to work in teams is sometimes greater. Going back to the pie thing, you know, proficiency is one thing, but the experience and everything else can be really a big deal. And then show commitment to the job at hand. You're there, and I know it might be tough because you might have a lot of feelers out there all at once, but you know, hopefully you can convey that commitment to the job and to the people you might be talking to. Hence Tiffany here with the rain cloud. Again, I have a minute for audio questions, or I can take a few here, and then I can reboot in if needed. I appreciate your time. I apologize running through that quick, but I think I got what I wanted to say.
All right. Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, totally understand the issues with the computer shutting down, but at the moment, there are no questions. Again, if you have them, type into the box. Again, FEMA may be something as you're getting into meteorology and exploring the field a little bit that you don't know a ton about, but want to learn more. Feel free to reach out to Brandon or reach out to me, and I can forward you an email address or anything like that. So appreciate your time, Brandon, this morning. All right, everybody. Welcome back. I've got about 5 till 2 p.m. Here on the East Coast, 5 till 11 p.m. for our friends on the West Coast. I wanted to just do a little bit of a reset, a reintroduction here before we go to our 2 o'clock talk. My name, if you're just joining us, is Ryan Ellis. I am the chair of the AMS board for Operational Government Meteorologists. It takes a while to get that out, but basically I represent all government meteorologists that work in operational meteorology, just like it says. And the reason that we had this talk, this webinar today, is I wanted to expand the focus of the board to include those interested in careers in government meteorology, and to reach out to those students and to provide a bridge to make some contacts, a bridge to gain information and education on what it takes to not only get into this field, but survive in it and to have a thriving career. So, you know, it was a passion of mine from the beginning. Meteorology was, but I did not decide to be an operational meteorologist until very late in my grad school career. And so what I realized after that was that there wasn't as much information out there. There seems to be more today. People are more connected. You know, that was a long time ago when I was in school. So social media was just getting started, and it wasn't really used in the way it is today. So there's a lot out there for you guys to explore. It's almost a fire hose of information. So trying to get through all that information and figure out what are the key takeaways, I think is something that our speakers today can help us with. As we go into the afternoon session, as I mentioned before the break, we're going to be heavily concentrating on NOAA and the National Weather Service. And you know, we thank the folks for their insights on emergency management this morning, both Katie Webster with North Carolina Emergency Management and Brandon Bolinski of FEMA. Again, if you have any questions from the morning session or you want to reach out to some of these folks and make contact, please do so. You can, if you don't have their contact information, you can email me at ryan.ellis@noaa.gov. And I'll be happy to put you in touch with whoever you want to speak with. Again, as we go into the afternoon session here, if you have questions, ask them in the question box, and we will get to them at the end of the talks. And you know, the questions so far have been great, so keep that up, keep the interaction up. We love interacting. No question is too stupid. Ask whatever you want. That's the only way you're going to find out. So it doesn't hurt to ask. So with that, I'm going to give control to Ted Funk, who is the SUE at the National Weather Service office in Louisville, Kentucky. And I think you should be getting control, Ted, and there it is. So I can see your screen now.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. And so Ted's going to be giving a talk. Originally, this was going to be the meteorologist in charge at Louisville, John Gordon's talk. Ted has graciously agreed to give it for him as as they work together. But I'll tell you, Ted, you got some big shoes to fill. I've been to some John Gordon talks, and they're very, very energetic.
Yeah, they are. They are. I think I can hold my own here, though. So. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. And hello, everyone on the call. Really appreciate you all taking your time to listen to the various speakers here. Hopefully, I'll have some good things that will be helpful to you as you continue through your academic career and then look for employment thereafter. So this title, this is basically hiring and separating yourself from your peers. And as a manager in weather service, this is probably the single most important thing that we do. And you'll see why. I mean, basically, you got to have the right people for the office. As Ryan said, my name is Ted Funk. I'm the SUE here at National Weather Service in Louisville. LMK is our three-letter ID. Our three-letter identification, and I've been involved with hiring and with John Gordon for many years. So we both pretty much come from the same spot in terms of our beliefs and the things that we look for and what we'd like to hire here. So what today is, it's things to consider. Okay, it's information about the hiring process and what we do here at Louisville, which could be very similar to what others do at other NWS offices, but there's probably differences as well. So I'm going to concentrate on how we approach things. What today is not is detailed steps of how to do your paperwork. You can go to NOAA's, the Workforce Management Office to try to find more information on that. And I'm not going to tell you exactly what you should or have to do. I mean, that's up to you. We're giving you the tools here from which you make the decisions of how you want yourself to move forward in your academic and eventually your professional career. So, okay, so this screen here will start off. I mean, here's your choice. Who do you want to be? You want to be the person here on the upper left who's a professional, knows what he or she does very well. They're great at what they do, at their craft. They provide excellent customer service. All right, or do you want to be one of the three stooges here? That they're the bumbling three stooges. They don't know what they're doing. They don't really care about other people. They just hit each other and goof around and don't really take their themselves or their jobs seriously. It's basically your choice. Well, what we do is we treat selections like if you're choosing a Supreme Court justice. I mean, in the Weather Service office, we have, it varies slightly, but low 20s number of people. So it's a small group, just like the Supreme Court justice is a small group. So if you hire one person who's not who you want, that can affect the entire office. So we really treat selections as the most important thing that we do, like choosing somebody for the Supreme Court. All right, so what do we look for in hiring here at Louisville? First and foremost, we hire for your people skills, your personality. Okay, we can't train for that. We can train for science and tech skills, but we can't train for your people skills. So that's the first thing we're going to look at. And if we find out that those are good, and I'll talk more about these in a little bit, then we proceed. If not, that sends a big red flag, and perhaps you do not proceed from there. So the other things here are not just things we would hire for at Louisville, but throughout the National Weather Service, and for that matter, throughout many organizations in the private sector as well. So leadership potential, all right? Great customer service. Do you serve the people, your peers, your, the people you go to school with? Do you serve them well, all right? And in the agency, in the organization, do you serve those who we serve well, all right? Innovation. We want people who are innovative, creative, passionate. Okay, John likes to use the term hungry. We want people who are hungry in what they do, not someone who just goes and does the bare minimum, but someone who goes well above and is really passionate and understands what you need to do to really get ahead and to really, again, provide that great customer service to those we serve. So strong work ethics, technical skills, We'll do a strength and weakness analysis. And ultimately, we want to look for the right fit. Who is the right fit for the office? We'll get a lot of people who apply, and maybe the top 10 might all be great people, okay? But we need to figure out who do we want to take out of that top 10. It ultimately comes down to what do we need and who do we feel would be the best fit for us at this time. There's more information here on the Workforce Management's website at that URL. That's a hiring guide. It can provide some more background information. So continuing on this theme here, skills needed in the job market. I mean, there's nothing here that's, you know, something that you probably don't already realize. We'll just go through this a little bit. Again, interpersonal skills, we'll talk about that here quickly. Leadership, time management. You have to be able to multitask. You have to be able to meet deadlines. You have to be able to do this in a way that you're providing great information, great service to those, again, that you're serving here. Get it done in a specified time period here. Marketing and networking, all right? Right now, as you're coming out of, or if you're in your academic career, but eventually coming out trying to look for a job, you're trying to market yourself, okay? What in the agency, you're trying to market us and make others, those again who we serve, understand who we are, what we do, and what we can do for them. That's the important part. How we can help them so they can make the decisions that ultimately affect their lives and their livelihood. So you market and you network, okay? You get to know people. You get to build relationships with folks, lasting relationships, so they come to trust you and want the information that you have to provide them. Oral and written communication. You're in school, so hopefully this is things that you do well there. Oral communication, obviously, you have to be able to communicate well with your peers, with your customers. That includes listening to them first, understanding their needs, all right? And then what you can do to help them meet those needs. So listening is huge in that. Written communication, I've been doing editing papers and memos and things for a long time, publishing some papers, and it's amazing how adults, some can't write very well at all. So when you're preparing your resume, writing is very important. Can you provide the information in a concise but complete format that has proper English, proper punctuation, and so on? That's really important. And I'd like to see that, and somebody who can do that well could be above someone who maybe can't do that quite as well, all else being equal. Research. You're in school, most of you, and if you're doing some sort of research, maybe for a senior project, a capstone project or something with a professor, or maybe in grad school, you'd maybe doing a master's, and I don't know, maybe a few years, or if you want to go on to get a PhD. But anyway, some sort of research. And in the Weather Service, it might be more applied research to operations, where you're doing case studies and researching an event that occurred and what you can learn from it to ultimately, again, provide a better outcome, a better service in the long run. If you can attend a conference, that's a great way to meet people, to network, to market yourself, and to learn some skills and some science skills that maybe you didn't get in the classroom. IT skills. This is a way to separate yourself. If you haven't, and you have the opportunity to take some software classes, Python, GIS is a big one, C++, and so on. Those things are a valued commodity as you come out of school. If you don't have those, it's not a showstopper, but again, it's just one thing to help you out and to market you a little bit better. So let's look at people skills and interpersonal skills here. So as you imagine, as you know, it's critical to get hired, and it's critical in the workplace. We want people who have high character, integrity, and courage, okay? Character, integrity makes sense. Courage is a person who's not afraid to get outside their comfort zone and do more than is expected. Even the little things, the fourth bullet there, willingness to do anything, that can set yourself apart. Heck, here at our office, let's say if we didn't have the cleaning crew able to come in or whatever, I don't care. I'll go and clean the bathrooms if I have to. I mean, it's not something I want to do, but I'll do it, because you got to be willing to do anything that really gets noticed. The little things get noticed, and that builds the reputation that you develop, all right? So be willing to do anything. You know, have the courage to go above and beyond, all right? Don't just sit there and wait for something to come to you. You go and get it, so to speak. So be open-minded. have a positive attitude, all right? All this builds is essential to building teamwork, again, effective communication. You build trust with folks, friendships, lasting relationships, camaraderie, and ultimately you move that office forward, again, with your teammates in order to do what your organization ultimately does, which in our case serves people. What don't we want? All right, well, we don't want someone who's arrogant. Now, obviously, there can be a fine line of being confident. You want to be confident, but not arrogant, okay? And obviously, you don't want to be condescending. And you don't want to be an I person, okay? I did this, I did that, I did everything. I developed the internet, whatever I might mean. Now, when you do your resume and you're listing your accomplishments, you have to put what you did. But instead of saying, for instance, oh, I am the president of my local AMS chapter at my university, you just say, president of the local AMS chapter at university. You don't need all the I's. A few I's is okay, but I is just too many. So you don't want to be a narcissist type person. Okay, if you're a constant or a habitual complainer or whiner, I mean, we're all human beings. We all do that to some degrees, but if that is more of your norm or your reputation, then that's not a good thing. We probably wouldn't want you here in our office. Go skip the complacent for a second, go to roadblocker and troublemaker. Obviously, those are pretty self-explanatory, but the complacency. I always thought one thing that could ruin the weather service is for its people to be complacent, okay? Or on autopilot. Basically, you do the bare minimum, what you have to do, but nothing more. And that's the worst thing. When you're complacent, you don't learn, you don't move forward, you don't have the courage to take on new responsibilities and serve people in a much better way. Complacency kills, okay? Again, the opposite of that, be aggressive, be passionate, and be hungry in everything that you do. And that includes not just in the weather service, but in college and anything you do in your life. So on our end, hiring officials, we need to be aware of a few things. We can't make pre-selections, all right? In our office, there's no such thing as that. And anybody has to watch their biases in everything we do, okay? Not just in hiring, but we all have human bias. And that affects the decisions we make and the actions that we take. So we need to all watch that. And sometimes it's somebody else who can tell us our biases more than we realize what our own biases are. So in terms of hiring here, we have to really be careful if it's someone we know well, that doesn't over-bias us, or if somebody from our alma mater, or maybe even someone who's related to us, or even like a friend's kid or whatever, because the process must be fair and equitable. So we have to treat all people the same way and look at their qualifications, okay? And that's what's important, and go through the process in the same way with each individual. There's some recommendations here for interview do's and don'ts, and some policy legal requirements, again, with workforce management. Communication with applicants, the next slide here. This is something that we try to do very much so. This was, John told me, again, John Gordon, the MIC here in Louisville, mentioned that Brian Lamar, who's the MIC at the Tampa, Florida office, kind of started this, and he got the idea from him. But we want to let you know where you stand. And we've all been there. We've all been in your shoes long ago. Like Ryan said, long ago, I went to college. And when you're applying for a job, you want to know where you stand, okay? And if somebody doesn't communicate that to you, you have no idea. Like if you apply for a job and weeks and weeks go by and you hear nothing, you think, well, heck, am I still in the running, or have I been eliminated? I don't have an idea because nobody's told me. So we want to try to communicate every step of the way, the process of what's happening, so you know where you stand, okay? And I'm sure you appreciate this a lot. I mean, because we care. Again, we're very pro-student, and we've all been there. We care. We know what it's like, so we want to make sure that you know where you stand, so we do that in the process. So what is the process, okay? Here at Louisville, I got different rounds here for you. It's not a boxing match. It's not like round one of the boxing match, but it's round one of the interview process here. And the first thing is going through your resume, your application, and doing a triage of all these resumes and checking references as well. The last people that we hired for new meteorologist positions in the weather service here at Louisville, we had 2 openings. We had 180 about applications for that. 180 and we're taking 2. That's not good odds. So you're, again, that goes back to really trying to set yourself apart, but we got to go through all those folks. All right, so we look at these resumes, we go through, we note significant accomplishments, anything unique that you've done that say, oh, wow, that's pretty cool, that maybe somebody else hasn't done. And again, anything that might separate you from the competition, all right? Good grades is obviously very important in school, but there's other things that are very important as well. It's just not good grades, because you know a lot of people can get good grades. Which one do we take out of all those people? So what we'll do is we'll separate the resumes into piles. There's yes, because they're going to move on to round 2. There's no, for whatever reason they're not. And then there's a maybe pile. We're not sure. We need to do a little bit more checking with references and past supervisors, and then see until we go through all the rest of the applications and see, okay, who do we have now and what are we going to do? When we do move to the second round, again, we're going to tell you, we're going to say, congratulations, you have moved on to round 2. And now that process is written questions, and that the others who don't move on, that they unfortunately didn't make it this time around. So depending on how many candidates we get for a particular job, we might send out 3 or 4 questions about the top 10 or 20 candidates. Again, that can vary. And usually it's probably 1 question from each of the management team, the MIC, the SU, the WCM, the Warning Coordination Meteorologist, and the ESA, the Electronic Systems Analyst. And then each one goes and grades our own question only, you know, to try to be fair within our own question. And then we compare overall scores. And from that, that's another thing that we'll use to figure out how round 3 will shake out, which is the orals, which I'll talk about in a second. So on your end, you have time to do this. All right, you might have a couple of days at minimum, maybe several days to formulate a really good answer. So that's when you should really take time and put effort into this. Again, the written communication comes in here. So be thoughtful and thorough, but also concise. That's important as well, conciseness, because we will limit you to the, you know, how long your answer can be and in what format. We don't want dissertations for every answer here, even if you would like to write one. All right, so the third round is orals. Oral interviews. The whole management team is involved. We usually have 10, 12 questions for you. Sometimes they'll have multiple parts. Some of the question types are a weather briefing, where we'll simulate, hey, somebody is called and needs a briefing for, I don't know, an outside concert that they're having, and they know a cold front's coming in that might have some thunderstorms here later today. So you have to provide a brief briefing on, and you know, talk to that person and what to expect. It's just to kind of see how you talk a little bit and how you can communicate with someone. There's questions that deal with behavior, personality, science questions, IT type questions, and then vision. Vision about yourself and your career, what you think, and vision about the Weather Service and where you think the agency should or is going. There might be a couple time questions where, I don't know, maybe we'll give you a you know, the media wants a soundbite on what you think the winter is going to be like. So that's a question that can trip people up, but it trips a lot of people up. So if you mess up, it's, you know, do your best, but don't worry about it. There's short answer word association questions. So like if we say weather ready nation, what comes to your mind in 1 sentence or 1 phrase? So it's just a short little association there. And then scenarios. Scenarios are important. So here's a couple scenarios. Now this wouldn't be something that you would get as a, you know, coming out of college and trying to get hired in. These are more advanced for people that have been in the agency for a while. So this one here is just some example for maybe a person who's applying for a lead forecaster. And this one says that assume you are the lead forecaster and there's a tornado watch in effect. You have a lot of staffing there and there's a large tornado on the ground and it's coming at you and you all need to take cover. So our backup office, who could provide service for us when we can't, in our case is Paducah. So we call them and we tell them the story, but say, I'm sorry, we really can't help you. We're busy with storms too. We're very short staffed. We don't have the people to help you. What would you do? So it's just trying to get you thinking on your toes of what would you do if some situation comes up, because it's real life. This stuff happens. And I know we're catching you, you don't have a lot of time to think about it. We're just trying to see what some initial responses are. And there's no like perfect answer. You know, it's just a few things we're trying to see if you realize at the time. This one here at the bottom is more if, say, if you're going to become a manager or maybe even MIC. In this case, it's a personnel type scenario because you have some freeze and drizzle that wasn't expected. It caused a lot of wrecks, some fatalities. Your midnight lead forecaster calls you at home at 6 o'clock saying, hey, that the day shift, they can't get in. And one of them was in a wreck and is on her way to the hospital. And one of the electronic technicians, his car bumped into another car in the office parking lot. You try to call a contractor to sand and to salt everything, but they're not available. So what would you do? So those are type of scenario questions. We like scenarios. I mean, you might get a few in the interview, and they're not going to be like all scenarios, but there'll be at least a couple, 2, 3. All right, so continuing on the third round, this is for you, advice for you guys. Just quickly, if you're doing an interview, the first thing is relax. Relax, think about your answers because, you know, it's hard, you're on the spot. So you're trying to think about what you're responding to before you quickly, you know, so take a couple seconds before you respond if you need to. And don't get hung up on a bad answer because you're inevitably going to give a bad answer, but know that everybody else is giving bad answers as well sometimes. So if you get hung up and if you gave a bad answer, you're likely not listening to subsequent questions or giving as good of an answer as you may otherwise had you not been hung up on the one that you felt you didn't do right. Now, what you can do at the end, and we'll listen to it, I don't know if everyone else is, you can at the end of the interview say, hey, I know I answered question 4 not too well. Do you mind if I re-answer it? And they may or may not say that's fine. If you're a golfer at all, you know what a mulligan is. It's a do-over. We give you one chance to answer a question later. If you're not sure at the time we ask it, we'll come back to it at the end. Most people don't use that, and that's okay if you know what you want to answer, but use it. Take advantage of it because for us, we give you that opportunity and there's no penalty if you do. But you would have to know if the interviewee is, or the interviewer is going to allow that or not. When you answer questions, always have some examples to go with it to help illustrate maybe a philosophical statement that you gave. Those examples can come from anything in your life, not just in your academic career. And then this is really important. Ask some questions, a couple of questions at the end after the formal interview ends, or maybe even make a final statement because engage us in conversation. That's so important because you're going to be nervous when you give an interview. But at the end, don't ask us a question like, well, when are you going to decide on the selection? Well, we'll tell you that. But you might have been on our website and said, hey, I noticed that you guys do a lot of research in quasi-linear convective systems, severe storms, and I'm really interested in that. How could I help you with that? Or I'm really interested in outreach and going out to schools and talking about meteorology to younger kids. How could I help with that? Those are the things that get conversations going. And when that happens, nerves disappear. I'll tell you the 2 that we just hired about 4 or 5 months ago, they were nervous, okay? That doesn't matter, we still hired them, but it was the after interview conversation that really allowed us to see much better how they really are when they're not on the spot and nervous, okay? It really opens up the personality. So I would advise having that in your arsenal ready to go after a formal interview. All right, so round 4. Sometimes in the first interview, we don't get a clear winner, so we had to go to a second interview. And that would just be maybe with the top 2 or 3 candidates. This would be a shorter interview, only a few questions, and conducted by just the MIC or maybe MIC and 1 or 2 management members. So when it comes time to select, the selection is not just based on the orals or the resume, it's based on everything, okay? Everything that you see there in that first bullet is very important. So you might not do as well in one, but you did great on others, and we still take you, all right? It's the full process here that we're considering here. And I'll tell you, the best candidate and the best fit wins. For somebody who's already in a weather service, we don't care if he or she is already on station and we know them well or off station, okay? Because we're getting information about that person off station from someone else or a couple people. So we don't really care. It's the best candidate, the best fit. I guess this wouldn't apply for you guys if you've never been in the weather service before coming out of college, obviously. So the important thing is here is we do a lot of due diligence throughout the entire process. And when we do that, we don't know where the best person is coming from. We don't know if they're behind door number 1, door number 2, or door number 3, but they're in there. And through this due diligence, a lot of times, most of the time, we'll end up with great employees who we love having, and they help lead our office forward. So continuing on the selection, we'll coordinate through the regional headquarters. Then we have to wait for workforce management to send out an official offer. That can take a little time. But once that does occur and once the candidate does accept, then we will email our staff and we will welcome you to our family. And that's what we consider ourselves, our family. And as soon as you are hired, you're part of that, okay? And you always will be. One thing that we'll do here in bullet 3 is talk to the other candidates as well. I'm not sure if all offices will do this. We feel that we have an obligation to do so because we want to help you. If you didn't get selected, we're not going to tell you, like, we're not going to tell 6 of you that you all finished number 2. Some people might do that. Oh, you finished number 2. Oh, you finished number 2. Oh, we all finished number 2. Great. We're going to tell you, be honest. Okay, you finished 6th, all right? You might think 6th, no, that's not so good. Well, you finished 6th out of 180 people. That's pretty darn good. There's just a few things maybe you can do next time that might help you out. So if you want feedback from the top candidates, maybe, I don't know, the top 10 or so that we end up with, if you come to us, we'll give you honest, meaningful feedback that you can use and leverage maybe the next time that you do an interview with somebody else. Okay, because look at this as a new beginning, a new opportunity. Every time you bid for a job, that's a new opportunity for you, okay? Maybe you don't get it, but you learn from it, and eventually you do get it, okay? And it's the same way for us. It's an exhausting process, but one that really helps match the office with the person who really is the best fit, the best person who's going to do a fantastic job for us. So this is not just the most important thing for us as hiring officials, it's the most important thing that you will do, all right? So take time and develop a great resume. Have people look at it and give you advice. You know, bring your A game. You want to separate yourself, and that doesn't start tomorrow. That should have already started, of separating yourself by doing a lot of things, not just in school, but anything you've done in your personal life, in the community, all kinds of things that just show the type of person and the character that you have. All right, make it count. And this is my final slide. As Ryan said at the beginning, John Gordon, the meteorologist in charge here, was supposed to give this, but he and I, again, see very eye to eye. We're both involved with the process here very much. So if you have any questions, besides contacting Ryan, as he had said, John or I will be glad to answer any questions or give advice even after this webinar is over. So that's all I got. I appreciate your time, and I'll be glad to take a few questions if you have any.
All right, thanks, Ted, very much. Great talk, great tips there. I just want to piggyback on that a little bit. We've been giving you the theme you can start to see in these talks is this is a very competitive field to get into. And, you know, I just want you to know that don't get down on yourselves. Rejection is part of life, and it's going to happen to you. Maybe it's happened to you already getting into schools. You're not going to get every job you applied for. It doesn't mean you're not a great meteorologist. It just means that maybe you weren't the best fit for this position, or maybe you've got a few skills to work on. I always think about it this way. A very recent example, I don't know if there's any hockey fans out there, but Joel Quenneville is the coach of the Chicago Blackhawks. He just got fired this week. He's got 3 Stanley Cups and probably going to the Hall of Fame. It doesn't make him a bad coach. It's going to happen. We do have one question here. This is a good one. This is from Michelle, and she says, hello, I have a general question about getting started in the workforce. I have 10 plus years of restaurant experience and 5 plus years of management experience within the restaurant industry. When it comes to entry-level positions, do you believe that this is something that can help to stand out on resumes, even though it isn't related to meteorology?
Yeah, anytime you want to tell us what you did. If you haven't been able to, you know, let's say you got a meteorology degree, but you didn't get a job, so you're in some other field. I mean, that's okay, because we want to see what did you do during that period of time. If you just sat around and did nothing, you know, that doesn't bode too well. But if you have really stepped up and have made the best out of any of the opportunities that you have been given, that's what we want to see. Not everyone has the same opportunities, but we want to see what you did with those that you did get, all right, and how you stepped up, how you demonstrate leadership potential, and all the things that I mentioned. I mean, obviously, I would put the things that are most relevant to the job first on a resume, but don't say, well, they won't think this is important. Put it down, because the selecting official, you don't know what they're looking for, but in general, it shows that you have been busy and you have been taking advantage of time and trying to keep up with things within your field while working in another field. So definitely yes, and especially the management part of that, because that shows how you can work well with people. So that part is really important as well.
Great. And then I had one that if you could just in a couple minutes, some people on this webinar may not know exactly what a science and operations officer does. And so if you could just quickly give a brief overview of what your position is.
Well, I've been doing this for quite a while. I've been a SU since, 94. That's a number of years. And I still don't know if I know what this position is about some days. But anyway, you're really involved with a bunch of everything. And basically the SU, the Science Operations Officers, you are the training person for the office. You're involved with training the staff on, how to radar signature, how to issue proper warnings, winter weather processes, new software, new techniques come in. You're the training person for the office, but you also oversee operations. So anything that happens within operations, technically I or the SU person oversees, but everyone in the office contributes to that stuff. So it's not just there's a SU and then there's everyone else. It's like I said, it's kind of like a family. Everyone's contributing to these programs and making a meaningful contribution, and that really helps me out. So yeah, I'm kind of the internal guy involved with that. The WCM, the Warning Coordination Meteorologist, he or she is more the external person who's dealing with spotters and FEMA and partners and all our partners out there who need the information that we provide, the service that we provide. But again, there's not a wall between the two. Everyone works together for the same ultimate purpose. Hopefully that answered the question a little bit. But again, the SU will be involved with hiring as this is and anything else. Like I said, cleaning the toilets if they needed me to.
All right, I got one more quick one from Jerry that says, I am a manager that hires meteorologists and met techs. You mentioned that personality is a go or no-go flag right off the start. Do you have any advice on how you can get a measure of those qualities in the interview environment?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, the way we first start that, because a lot of people we don't know. Some people we will know, and it's easy to detect that already, but for those we don't know, we rely heavily on the accurate and honest advice of the references, and if it's somebody who's coming from college, the professors that he or she has. And believe me, we will check, and your reputation goes a long way. So everything that you've done up until now and will do, that all gets noticed and that gets passed on. So you do the best you can. It's sometimes, again, it's the little stuff. So let's see, the other part of that question was, what was the other, read the last part of that question again. Ryan, you there?
Sorry, I was on mute. Hold on. Yeah, it said, do you have any advice on how you can get a measure of those qualities in the interview environment?
Oh, yeah. And that reminded me of one other thing I wanted to say. So actually, during the interview, we should have a good handle, because you probably won't even advance in the interview stage if you didn't get checked out well when we check references and past supervisors or co-workers or what have you. But having several people in on the interview process when we do the orals is really important, because we each hear a little bit different. Somebody might pick up on arrogance that I didn't pick up at all, or I might pick up on a good thing that someone else didn't pick up at all. So we do a lot of cross-checking, and we talk afterwards amongst ourselves, because several people listening to the same input, the same interview, really helps us kind of decide that. We can pick up little subtleties there. And again, that's why I said after the interview, those questions and conversation, casual conversation you can have after the interview, that's why that is so important, because we can pick up something that's totally different and a lot of times even better than maybe the nervousness or the bad answer that came through in the interview itself. Hopefully that kind of addresses your question.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're going to hold other questions for now. I'm sure if you want to get in touch with Ted or John Gordon, they'll be more than happy to talk with you. Thanks so much, Ted, for stepping in. And with that, we're going to switch over to the West Coast. We're going to go to Adam Roser, who is with the National Weather Service in San Diego, I believe. Is that right, Adam?
Yeah.
All right, the floor is yours until about 3 o'clock-ish, maybe a couple minutes over.
So I am a recent hire here at the National Weather Service in San Diego. I was just hired back in June. As the ladies mentioned before, I was the last round to be hired where you could apply to kind of anywhere and everywhere. So this will kind of be my experience kind of going through that and how to interview for the Weather Service. It's been great here working at San Diego. We have a great view from our office, the mountains in the valley there, but also a very diverse county warning area with the beaches. They're in the desert, Palm Springs, and the mountains. So it's been a good experience so far. So I'm going to share a little input with you here. All right, so just on the agenda here, a little intro about myself. I'll talk about some courses and interests that I've done and that you can do for getting a job in the Weather Service. I'll move on to a little bit about resume tips and interview tips, you know, to make yourself more marketable. And then I'll kind of talk about what I do here at NWS San Diego and about the job of itself. So just a little bit about me. I went to Ohio University there in Athens, Ohio. I graduated in 2017, so I am quite young, pretty much a student as well. So I can really relate to you, you all as students. I got my geography meteorology degree as well as my French degree. If you have a passion, go for it. I love foreign languages, so getting a French degree was awesome. Study abroad if you can. I also did, as I kind of discussed before, I'm still a part of the Masters in Emergency Management program there at Millersville. It's an online program, which is really, really good. You can kind of do it, you know, anywhere you want at your own pace. I did it for about a year, and then I have about 4 classes left to go. So kind of just going to scope that out here in the next year or two. And then a couple internships and different things that I've done in meteorology. I was a forecaster for the North Dakota Cloud Modification Project up there in Bismarck, North Dakota. Really good experience forecasting for the cloud seeders and aviation. I've been a volunteer at the National Weather Service in Charleston, West Virginia, which is Ohio University's local forecast office, and then also at the National Weather Service in Bismarck as well. And then just last year, I was a graduate assistant for the Millersville Emergency Management Program. As I said, the program is online, but they also have a Center for Disaster Research and Education there on campus in Pennsylvania, where I was helping out with that for last year. So a really good experience there. So kind of different courses you should be thinking about taking. Sometimes, you know, we're in our meteorology degree and it's, you know, it's a lot to take in, but you know, kind of something little extra things that you can be thinking about taking. So I know a GIS class is required, but you know, once you take these classes, are you thinking about, oh, this really interests me, maybe I should take another GIS class, and then maybe kind of develop something out of that. Programming, if you're really good at Python, C++, any of that, if you're really good at that and you like doing it, take another class, see where it goes. The National Weather Service is definitely looking for that GIS programming type of experience. Also, communication, public speaking, you can never go wrong with that. There's definitely, you know, many different avenues you can take with that. I regret kind of not taking a public speaking class in college. I wish I would have done that, but you know, it's never too late. You can always do it in your professional career as well, but that'll definitely benefit you as you try and get a job into the Weather Service. And then kind of what was mentioned before, I think a couple of these talks, social science, emergency management, those are very important that the National Weather Service has been really looking into. So any psychology or sociology type of classes that you can take with those, I think that would be very beneficial. I know Millersville has a bachelor's in emergency management. So any type of classes, you know, you can dual major or minor in would be a very good thing to do. So focusing on an interest, a niche, if you will, kind of, this is really good to, show supervisors what your big focus is on, what you want to research more, what you want to look into. My big question here, what interests you in meteorology that you want to further explore? And the key of that is what you want to, not as what you think you have to. So that is definitely something, you want something that you are passionate about, excited about. And so, this can start in your undergrad career and then transition into a master's degree in grad school. That's definitely something that's good. Find something you have a passion for, definitely want to research, something that you want to get into. As we've said before, some of those, senior capstone projects, research projects are always a good place to start. Speaking with your professors about, what kind of options there are, what you can do, and, come up with your own ideas, come up with things that you want to do, and your professors, I think, can really help you out and make a project out of it. And this shows employers, research skills. If you're working even with a person, project work experience, working with others is always something that is very important to show on a resume and while you're interviewing. And really, how can this passion help improve the field of meteorology? So when you're trying to, think of an interest or think of something you want to do, try and focus that passion, that study, and how it can improve the field and how it can, make things for the Weather Service kind of improve that as well. So kind of my story, how, I kind of went through college. My passion, helping people in need during natural disasters. It's not very specific or anything, but it's good to have this sort of type of passion in your mind that you want to get something done and gear it toward the weather as well. So I joined different organizations in college. APHIO, Alpha Phi Omega, was a co-ed service fraternity. I did a lot of service projects in the Athens community. So that was really where my service background grew and blossomed throughout college, was through that organization. And then through meteorology, of course, through your local AMS chapter. Very important to be part of that, whether it's at your university or whether it's in kind of a local regional chapter across the state, wherever you may be. It's definitely important to join that. I also joined the AMS Committee on Emergency Management. So yeah, if you have any other interests or anything, there's the AMS community page on the AMS website that's good. Maybe post some of your interests, and there's probably a committee for you to join that you can be a part of and meet new people in this growing field of meteorology, emergency management, and all of that. And so, my passion was more with people side of things and emergency management and all of that. So I really wanted to go to grad school in emergency management. And, there aren't many of them out there, especially ones where you can actually go to the school. A lot of them are actually online. So, whether you want to travel to a school or whether you want to, maybe stay at home, work, and then do your degree as well, there are different options for emergency management with that. But when I was in my master's program there at Millersville, I worked a little bit with the National Weather Service. So, if you want to get into the Weather Service, it's always good to be working with your local office, all of that. And so I worked with the State College office a little bit on Storm Ready. So something, you can get working with the National Weather Service office is always a good thing. If you're interested in NWS or in FEMA, I can just tell you from my past experience, having the EM Masters will definitely help you stand out for an interview. So kind of, with the student life here, being a student can be hard, especially in meteorology. If you have any other majors as well, it can definitely feel like a lot. Graduating was, it was very fun, but also, sad time leaving the university, but you can officially say you're a meteorologist after you graduate. So it's worth it. Don't give up, whether it's in your classes or applying for, any type of internships or jobs. As I state here, applying for a job is a job in and of itself. I think my parents probably told me that, but they're definitely correct. I can attest to this. Younger students, freshmen, sophomores, feel free to ask, juniors and seniors who have applied for these internships, who have had them. Ask them about their experience. Ask them, how did you get it? How did you do it? Sometimes it's kind of hard to balance, but asking your peers is always a good way to go about that. Little rhyme time for you, after having said all this, it'll be okay, but maintain your GPA. You don't want to kind of fall off the wagon there, especially if you're a junior or a senior and, your meteorology classes start to dwindle or anything like that. So definitely don't let it affect your grades, but keep pushing through and something will come. If you are in a grad program right now, any grad students who are watching, see if you're allowed to finish up early, if you're allowed to maybe do some of the other classes remotely. I know a couple of people have been hired who have, they're midway through their graduate degrees and they're getting into the weather service and they're able to finish the degrees and, finish their theses, in other places. So definitely see what the terms are for the grad program. As for me in Millersville, I was able to stay for a year and then was able to leave and kind of finish the program. So see what kind of the contract is for that and if you're allowed to pursue a position while you're still in grad school. So a couple of resume tips. I know some people have already kind of given some advice on this. As someone who just went through this is kind of what I had to deal with. So obviously it's through USA Jobs. I put in, I'm pretty sure you have to have a full-time, you have to have a actual degree when applying for the full-time position. I've tried as a senior, usually don't get referred. So usually you have to apply when you have a degree, but it's always good to apply anyway. And then as we've spoken about before a few times, those questions are very important to incorporate into your resume. The workforce management personnel are not meteorologists, so just make sure that you are matching those questions and answers correctly. Kind of avoid any jargon if you can. All types of experience, big or small, lots of different experiences that you've had in meteorology that can really tell them who you are, tell them what you've done. And so kind of a good tip is have two types of resumes, the 1 5 or 6 pager for USA Jobs, and then also to the hiring official. So once you're referred, you can send a kind of a condensed resume to them, tell them who you are. I was referred to over 30 offices, so I sent 30 separate emails. It took a long time, but I wanted to make sure that I was going to get hired somewhere, and so I wanted to each of those people to know who I was. And so it can take a lot of time, but it's definitely worth it in the end if you do it the right way. So receiving the interview, things that you should be doing right now in college. So there are some different things I want to touch upon. Involvement in your local AMS chapter, very important. I'm going to talk about a little bit about internships, networking, very important, as we've heard. Big thing, act as if you are already working for your desired organization. So if you want to be in the National Weather Service, it is time to act like you are in the National Weather Service. What would you be doing? What things should you be doing in the community in research? Some questions to keep in mind there. As we've heard, hiring officials may receive over 100 applications. I think I applied to the Louisville office. I made it, I think, to the second round, and he said there were about 185 applications. And they were only hiring 2 people. So it can be a little intimidating, but the time to make yourself stand out is now. So definitely make sure you're doing those things to make yourself stand out from the crowd. So AMS chapter involvement, very important. If especially younger students, if you're not involved in your local chapter yet, definitely get involved. It's very important. It's very beneficial. I had a wonderful time at Ohio University being involved in the chapter throughout my 5 years of being there. So it can definitely, boost your resume, and it can really help you obtain a job. Chapter officer, being good if you're a junior or senior, and maybe thinking about it, I think it's definitely a good thing. I was an officer for a year. It was a great experience to be kind of a leader in that respect. Even if you're younger, the ones who apply, the ones who put themselves out there and apply themselves and run for different officer positions while they're young, well, most of those people have gotten officer positions later in their years in college and go far. So it's never too early to run for a position. Always looking for leadership efforts in your chapter, ways to improve your chapter. That would definitely be something that you would like to say in an interview. Different ways you've improved the chapter. I would made a co-op observation site for Ohio University in collaboration with NWS Charleston, and kind of taught my folks at my chapter how to record observations and different things like that. So that's kind of an example of something to improve. And a big thing is collaborating with potential employers, partners in your area. Research kind of who the National Weather Service, what kind of partners they work with. Fire, police, really a wide array of community members. And so a good idea is, collaborating with different partners in your local area and seeing how you can help them if they, would like to work with students in meteorology. And also promoting ideas, kind of going along the same lines, promoting ideas that align with professional jobs. This picture on the right, I think I saw it on Instagram. I don't think we've ever done this before. I think it's their first time doing it, but I was very proud because I thought, wow, this is very National Weather Service. This is definitely something I would be doing here in my job at San Diego. And so here they are at a Safety Day outreach event, teaching folks about weather. So anything that your chapter that you can come up with and do in the local community is a really big benefit, and something I think employers would really like to see. Internships. So we've talked a little bit about today about the internships that are, that'll really get you into the Weather Service. As I said, from my experience, I've done 2 volunteerships. They're awesome. It's don't limit yourself to only where you live. It's really good to, especially those smaller offices who aren't, having all these meteorology students, knocking on their door asking for a volunteership. If you can really, if you have a family member or a friend, maybe who lives near a local office, maybe a smaller office, maybe live with them for the summer. It's not paid, but maybe you could get a job somewhere else and then work at the Weather Service a little bit. But doing that is probably the best way, in my opinion, to get your foot in the door. And always ask about receiving these. Not just really, you're not really going to get a position if don't ask about it. So when I got my internship up in Bismarck with the cloud modification project, I noticed there was a forecast office up there. So I emailed people and asked about this position, if they'd be willing to take me on, and they looked through my schooling and transcript, and it was a yes. So it's sometimes it can be easier than you think. But also, if you have an NWS FEMA pathways, applying for the Holling Scholarship, that is also very important. Those are definite ways to really get into the Weather Service. If you can get one of those, you have a very good chance of making a job in an office. Very good things. I've had experience with local emergency management offices as well. So while I was a grad student at Millersville, I also volunteered at the local emergency management office there in Lancaster County. Great experience to kind of, a lot of us are so sciencey and meteorologists and all of that, but it's really good to kind of expose ourselves to another entity that, we closely work with. So that's definitely something that you should get into. Contact your local office. The one in Lancaster County kind of had like an intern academy, but don't be afraid to contact your local county office and see what you can do for them. Maybe they have a project for you. And then also private sector internships. Yeah, just because these aren't, federal government or anything like that, doesn't mean that they don't have clout. So it's, if you can do something like AccuWeather or WeatherBug. I know intern we just hired here a couple months ago, she did an internship at WeatherBug. It's very good to have, people working for the National Weather Service who have experience in the private sector, since we are working with them closer and closer than ever. A little thing about networking here, it's very important. As I kind of mentioned before, I'm more of a people person, more of an outreach oriented, educating people on the weather, talking at webinars like I'm doing right now. So, networking is definitely a big part of this job. And, if you're kind of just do your own thing and kind of just stay at your school or maybe something like that, it's definitely think about attending these conferences and putting yourself out there, really. Professors, great help. They can always guide you kind of, where you need to go. They ask good questions, kind of, what do you want to do? What are you looking for in the future? And then they can definitely help you out with that. Conferences are very important. Picture in the middle there, those are 2 meteorologists in charge. And the guy on the left, I met him at a conference a couple years ago, and now he's my boss. So that just tells you that you never know who you're going to meet at these conferences. You never know who you're going to talk to. And so it's always good to network with that. And so always just put yourself out there at conferences, and feel free to shake someone's hand and introduce yourself. Again, I say, networking with government, private sector organizations in your local area is always very important. Working with your local National Weather Service office, definitely if you want to get into the Weather Service, that is something I highly recommend, especially, to really, kind of get you to meeting people and making sure that, you are making yourself known. Like the picture at the right there, visiting the National Weather Service in Charleston with our college crew there. And then get involved. How can you help them? That's a big thing that they want to know. And so, making sure that you're always willing to help and willing to get involved is important. So the interview, as I said before, this is kind of right before they kind of cut it off, where you could only apply to 5 positions. So I had 16 interviews, 14 of them were by phone, 2 were by Google Hangouts. So, don't be afraid if they want to do a Google Hangout. They're actually, in my opinion, kind of better. You get to see who the people are that you're working with, and you get to, really kind of have a better conversation. And so there could be anyone on the call, the meteorologist in charge, warning coordination meteorologists, science and operations officer, forecasters, anyone. So expect that. There could be as little as 5 questions, maybe upwards of 16 questions. So you never know kind of how short or how long the interview is going to go. A written interview is possible. As I said, I did the Louisville interview. Some of it was written, and they may ask science-related questions to meteorology. So be prepared, whether that's on the phone or whether that's in, written. You may get a question or two, kind of a really sciencey question about, meteorology. So definitely be prepared for that. But stay calm, cool, and collected. This is your time to share with who you are, talk about your passion, and of course why you want to be a professional meteorologist in the National Weather Service. So just a couple interview tips here, kind of incorporating your background and experience kind of to these 3 NWS fields here, kind of the organization as a whole and the forecast office you're applying to, those decision support services, so outreach and forecaster input on decisions, all of that, and then scientific research and different technology skills. So kind of the forecast office as a whole, what you can expect. They might ask you about the NWS mission. What do you think about it? Building a weather-ready nation. What does that mean to you? Also in an interview, they may ask about specific weather impacts to their office. So if you're applying to a place like Bismarck, North Dakota here, make sure you know kind of what weather they deal with versus if you're applying somewhere like here in San Diego, California. So that is something they'll definitely want to know about. Why the National Weather Service? Why are you applying to this office? Make sure you know you have a good answer for that. And then as was stated before, kind of definitely there will be scenario-based questions in your interviews, whether it's answering someone's call on the phone, whether it's dealing with another forecaster in the office. So make sure you're kind of ready for those types of questions. Decision support services, you know, it's good to incorporate kind of projects that you've done with the weather service offices, with your school, with your local AMS chapter. You know, have you done Storm Ready? As I said before, I created a co-op site with the National Weather Service in my school, different things like that. If there are any integrated warning teams that your National Weather Service puts on, you know, feel free to reach out to them and see if they would like an academia presence. I think that would be something very important. If your local NWS office hasn't really put on an integrated warning team in a while, maybe you all could put it on your chapter, so, and invite them. So something, you know, good ideas that stem from the integrated warning team, I think is definitely something that is important. In different campus events, you can talk about, you know, fundraisers or different things that you've done on campus to promote the weather meteorological knowledge throughout your community. Also talking about social media, what experiences you have with that, and then different communications, presenting, tabling here as I did at AMS in Austin. So, you know, kind of incorporating those things to the DSS level is very important in the Weather Service. Looking at the more scientific research side, technology side, if you've been into, you know, GIS or coding, you know, those are very important. Have you presented these at conferences, the Senior Capstone Project? Those are definitely, you know, some good things to use when talking about research experience and, you know, conference experience. If anything is, if you've had anything published, that's really good to kind of incorporate your research knowledge and things that you could bring to the office as a whole. And then just some miscellaneous questions. So, you know, I had 16 interviews. So these are some of the questions that really stood out that I was asked a lot. You know, what is your greatest accomplishment? You know, it can be in meteorology or it can be in, you know, life in general. When have you implemented change or innovation? That is probably one of the biggest ones that was asked. So I'll let you think about that, kind of how you've changed, you know, your AMS chapter or change, you know, something in the research community that's very good to look at. Working with others, of course, customer service. The National Weather Service has service in its name, so, you know, questions about customer service is very important. Leadership skills, very important. You may ask about shift work, you know, are you willing to do it? Have you done it before? Maybe talk about your experiences with it. And a big one is, will you actually move here? It's different when clicking on a box in USA Jobs and say, okay, sure, versus when they ask you, and it's a little like, oh, you know, you kind of might have to rethink. So make sure you apply to places where you want to go. Lots of opportunities when you get into the Weather Service. You know, the world is your oyster. You can kind of take it where you know, want to go with it. I've had a lot of cool opportunities here. Got to meet a Bobcat alumni at the FAA Center there north of Los Angeles. Really cool, cool outreach events that we do and that you can do if you're get in the Weather Service. It's a great opportunity. Even, I know we're not broadcast meteorologists, but you never know. You may walk in one day and they may say, oh, you want to do a TV interview? They're coming in an hour. So good thing I was dressed up for the occasion. So I was able to be on TV, great experience. So never know where it can take you, the opportunities in the Weather Service. The job is really great.
I got to give you like a 2-minute wrap up, okay?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Last slide.
Okay.
So yeah, the job has turned your passion and interest to a reality. Good place to explore, a new place, get involved in your local community. My job is involved, lots of training involved, but it's definitely something that's worthwhile.
Oh, I think we lost your mic. Are you back? Hello?
Okay, yeah, if
There you go.
anyone has any questions or anything, there's my email, willing to help. Thank you for having me. Yeah, if you have any other questions or comments, I'd be glad to answer them for you. Email me anytime.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's a great perspective because, like you said, you just went through it. This process is continually changing. What I went through when I first came in is totally different from what people are going through now. And that may change again in 6 to 12 months. So always try to seek people who have just gone through the experience, whether it's somebody you know from school or maybe contacting your local NWS office to ask, about the process. And most places, they are very happy to talk to you. I'm continuing to answer some questions through text. I don't want to take any here at this point because we want to keep on time. I'm going to switch presenters to Dr. Genene Fisher, who is with us today. And just a segue from what Adam was talking about, the reason she's here today is because a student just like you put himself out there, and he had done an internship with NCEP, and then he became part of our board here. And so as the student member of our board, Connor Belak had this contact with Dr. Fisher and asked her to present today, and graciously she has agreed to do so. And so there you can see right there that how someone like you sitting there right now, just like he is, can have an impact if you put yourself out there. Dr. Fisher, just going through a short bio here, to know who you're speaking with. She has a PhD in atmospheric and space science and a Master of Public Policy from the University of Michigan, and also a BA in planetary and space sciences from Boston University. She worked in the AMS policy program. She was an NWS senior advisor for space weather, and now she is the executive officer of the National Centers for Environmental Prediction, which is part of NOAA and part of the Weather Service. So a lot of things that she's responsible for. I will unmute her and give her the floor. Thank you, Dr. Fisher.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. I wasn't expecting that full bio, but I appreciate it. You can hear me fine, right?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, yeah, and thank you for also calling out Connor. He's in the picture on the right-hand side. So you heard some really great advice today for the students. I'm going to take some of that and use that, incorporate into the information we give our students here. Today, I'm happy to discuss the NCEP internship program. NCEP is the National Centers for Environmental Prediction. We started a internship program 2 years ago. I'm also going to talk a little bit about some of the other NOAA programs. I've seen them mentioned, throughout the webinar today as well, which is great. What I want to do is I want to stress how important it is to gain experience through internships, because you're going to put this on your resume. This is what's going to give you the edge when you apply for jobs. And just give you an example, in our first year from 2017, and again, I should mention, we've always had students here, but we created a formal program. We wanted something organized where we could provide mentoring to the students as well. And so from our first year in 2017, we actually hired 4 students 2 as contractors, 1 as a pathway student, and 1 just came in as a meteorologist intern. So you can see the advantage of trying to doing internships, having experiences within weather service that will give you an edge. And overall, all the students use this experience to help guide their careers, whether it was continuing in grad school or then applying for additional jobs. So many of you are probably very familiar with the National Hurricane Center or the Storm Prediction Center, but you may not know what NCEP is. NCEP basically it's a collection of the 9 national centers, which are listed here. In general, we provide foundation for a national level weather service models, forecasts, and products. We're part of the field like the regions. We work with the WFOs, the River Forecast Centers, the National Water Center, the Central Weather Service units. These offices may use NCEP information as input into their products and services. And we also collaborate with the other parts of the field when we put out our products and services. So now I'd like to just briefly go over each of these because this might be the first time some of you are seeing these. The Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City, in general, provides aviation warnings and forecasts of hazardous flight conditions. The Climate Prediction Center in College Park monitors and forecasts short-term and seasonal climate fluctuations and provides information on effects the climate patterns can have on the nation. And I should say, just to mention this, many times when people apply here, they mention climate change. That we don't do that here. So at CPC. So make sure you carefully, you read what each of these centers are about if you're applying for an internship or even a job here. Environmental Modeling Center in College Park develops and improves numerical weather, climate, hydro, and ocean prediction. The National Hurricane Center in Miami provides forecasts, watches, and warnings of hazardous tropical weather. And then NCEP Central Operations, or as we call it NCO, sustains and executes the operational suite of models and forecasts and runs the IT infrastructure and dissemination. Ocean Prediction Center in College Park issues weather forecasts for the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans north of 30 degrees north. The Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado issues space weather alerts and warnings for solar and geomagnetic disturbances. The Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma issues, as you're familiar with, tornado and severe weather watches. And then the Weather Prediction Center here in College Park provides nationwide analysis and forecast out to 14 days. And we're 24/7. We have people that are, all through the day on shift. We also have people that are also not operational, that are also working to develop and improve the tools and products that we use. Okay, this is just another snapshot of what we do here at NCEP. We're a critical component of the National Weather Service collaborative forecast process. We like to say we provide everything from the sun to the sea. So the solar monitoring warnings and forecast, aviation forecast and warnings, extreme events, high seas forecast and warnings to day 5, week 3 and 4, seasonal outlooks, El Nino, La Nina forecasts. These and those are from our service centers. And then we also have I mentioned EMC and NCO, which provides a lot of the foundation, which is the EMC. It provides the model development. And NCO provides, we run the supercomputers, the workstation, and network operations. So now let's talk about the internship program. As I mentioned, we started this program 2 years ago, and now we're gearing up for a third, so we're learning lessons each year. We offer up to 10 paid summer internships, undergrad or graduate, at our 5 centers in College Park: CPC, EMC, NCO, WPC, OPC. It's a 10-week program. I try to model this after the NSF REU program, so they seem to work really well. And so we start usually first week in June and then end second week in August. Each student will have a mentor. And projects can include improving understanding of forecasting problems, addressing critical aspects of operational model development, incorporating social science knowledge and practices to better communicate forecast uncertainty, creating new data analysis techniques that could be used in operational forecasting. And the key for us is, in addition to the project, there's a lot of other professional development. Students attend lectures, they participate in workshops to build knowledge and skills relevant to the job. And then we also have them present their projects at the end of the summer. Let's see. And then some of the things that with our brown bag discussions, we like to focus a lot on, again, career development. We'll do things like personality tests, Myers-Briggs, standout, because we feel it's important to know those things. Many times people don't take those kind of personality tests until they're like years into a job. So walking into a job already knowing what knowing yourself, having the self-awareness, and then bringing that into the office can be very valuable. We do a lot of networking. Both within the students themselves network. By the end, they're all like, really, really close friends. We also network within NCEP, but then also the Weather Service. We go to Silver Spring, we meet high-level people in the other line offices as well. And we get I would say about 300 applications. So it is competitive. And so I'll talk a little bit more about what we look at in an application. So eligibility. You have to be enrolled, you must be enrolled in an undergraduate. You have to have completed your second or third year. And we're really strict about that. Or you can be in a graduate degree program. You have to be enrolled at the time of applying. You have to be a US citizen and willing to undergo a security background check. And we have a wide range of majors we welcome. I've listed some here. I always get the question, well, mine's not on that list. And I say, well, as long as it's relevant to something we do at NCEP, then apply. We provide an internship stipend, $5,000 for the 10 weeks, furnished housing. Last year we had the students stay at the University of Maryland because we're on the Maryland campus, and that worked well. We're going to do that again. And then we also a travel allowance that allows the students to get here to College Park and then get back home. So we're in the process of redoing our webpage. This is our webpage. It will work. And then also we are working on our application process. We're getting a little more sophisticated now, so it's not quite ready yet, but we expect it will be up and running on that webpage by late November. But our deadline will be February 1st. We usually like to have it sometime after the AMSC annual meeting so we could market it to the students there. Okay, so here are some examples of project titles. We get this, and these are just a few just to give you an idea. And I'll just say the picture in the bottom corner is our building. So for the Climate Prediction Center, one example is diagnosing geospatial uncertainty visualization challenges and seasonal temperature and precipitation forecasts. You can see they can get very technical as much as the student wants. EMC, evaluating high resolution model performance of convective initiation during severe weather events. NCO, this past summer was the first time we had a student working at NCO, so it was a computer scientist major, and she was working on IT system health checklist. So you could either, when you're applying, you could either propose a project. I would really like to work on, XYZ, or the mentor in the center might then propose something based on your skill set that you show in your resume. And I want to say also that about 2/3 of our students each year do present at the AMS annual meeting. That is a goal that we try to encourage. And then again, just some additional ones at WPC, verification of WPC freezing rain guidance using ASOS ice accretion observations, OPC, Atlantic hurricane force storms, and then Office of the Director. So that's me. And then I've worked with the student last 2 years. Last year, I've routed the science on a sphere into our building. So I had a student help develop, sort of a manual on how to use the SOS, and then also how to develop data sets that can go on the SOS. And then the year before, I had somebody working on outreach material for NCEP. So this gives you an idea of like the kind of projects that we do. So now what do we look for in applications? We ask for a personal statement. And again, this is probably similar if you're applying to other internship programs, you might be able to use the same one. We want to know what your relevant career interest and related past experiences, why you're applying, and then also include mention of the center you're most interested in and why. And so what we really look for is, are you taking initiative? Are you, it's interesting, a lot of the essays start with, I've always, since a kid, I've always wanted to study the weather or be a meteorologist. They all, like 90% start like that. So you're going to have to find a way to differentiate yourself and, give that hook that we're going to be like, oh, okay, we're really interested in, in this. We look at what you did to take initiative. And I've heard a lot of that through the webinar today. Have you done another internship? And if you haven't, we've actually accepted students who have not done a formal internship, but they've shadowed at a WFO, or they've chaired a committee, like say at an AMS, or chaired a session or at a workshop. So we review that as very important. But again, this is competitive, and so typically people have had some kind of intern or research project experience. It could be at your university. You're working with your advisor on a project, like that has to be emphasized. And then although you might express interest in a particular center, know that we also review it, because you may not realize what all the centers do. So I will then give it to the other centers to review as well. So regarding your CV or resume, you must proofread it, just like you would apply anywhere. And we don't want to see any spelling or formatting issues, because that's a reflection on you. You want to show, again, you've had some, so you want to show you have some experience in NCEPs. A lot of people will write in, will apply, and they have no clue what we do. Like, you're not going to be considered at all. Like, go look at the webpage, go look at the products, say you've used our products somehow. I mean, that's what's going to make you stand out. And then also we do look at programming experience, because that's a lot of what the students might do. I mean, some of them might do more social science or some other analysis, but Python is a really big programming language we use here. Some of the other centers use C# scripting, Genpack, even some Fortran. You should have some familiarity, let's say, with Python. You don't have to be an expert in it, because what we like to do in the summer is to help you improve your Python experience, or other coding as well. So, okay, and continuing on, we have 2 letters of recommendation. So ask someone who knows you very well that can describe your strengths and how this internship would greatly benefit you. And transcript, make sure you've taken the relevant coursework. We actually do, we don't focus so much on grades as much as what was the coursework. When we see, like in freshman year, students just take a bunch of fun classes, which fine, great. It's not like, that's not what we are looking for here at NCEP. Like, we want to see that you're already committed to meteorology, you've already taken the classes, you're starting to take the classes of your major. And then also following up with the references to make sure they actually submitted to us. And I just put here some quotes. I mean, we do a lot of evaluations at the end, like, what did you learn, what did you like, what could we improve? And just to show you what some of our students, what they reported back they learned the most. The forecasting techniques, the models, the different programming languages, how to build a network, professional development, how to communicate with others. Realizing that, I mean, one of the things I'm always interested in hearing is that people are so surprised how helpful people are here. I don't know what they were expecting, but they find they have this view of government, and then they come here and they realize, wow, everyone's like willing to work with me. So we're really proud of that. So now I'm going to switch a little bit. If you're a graduate student, let's say you're like, well, I don't want to do an internship. This is something I just want to mention. We run a visiting scientist program. It's for professionals, but it's also for grad students. If you're working on your thesis, you can receive funding. So it'd be travel and local living costs to come to one of our 9 centers. It's not just College Park. We have UCAR administer it for us. This is the URL. I also run this program, so if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with me. And now I want to talk about some other NOAA student opportunities. You've heard all through the webinar today about the student volunteer program. So many of the WFOs offer opportunities through the student volunteer program. And what I find is you just start going to their websites, and then that's where you'll find the information. And again, if you can't get into their volunteer program, contact the office about shadowing, meeting, and I heard other people mention it, meeting with a forecaster to network, because we actually look at that, not just for the internship program, but for the entry-level positions here too. Did they shadow at a WFO? What's their contact with any part of the weather service at all? So highly encourage that. So now this is information from the NOAA Office of Education. They oversee several student opportunities. For undergraduates, they get about 130 to 150 Hollings scholars, and then 8 to 10 EPP, which is the Educational Partnership Program. Those are focused more on minority serving institutions, and so these are undergraduate scholars. There's tuition support in the junior and senior year, about $9,500 a year, and you get paid summer internships at NOAA. And then you also get funds to present at conferences. This is a really great program. Look into it if you're eligible. We also at NCEP will have Hollings and EPP students, and I know they're also placed at other locations in the Weather Service. So a little bit more about these undergraduate scholarships. Current sophomores can apply between September 1st and January 31st. You must be a U.S. citizen or a U.S. national if you're applying for EPP. You have to be enrolled in a no emission field. You need a GPA of 3.0 for Hollings and 3.2 for EPP. I already mentioned the EPP scholars are a minority serving institution, and it's just one. You can do one online application for both programs, and then you need your transcripts, your essay, and your 2 references. Again, a little bit more about the EPP program. I'll just point out the one that's most relevant to Weather Service is the one at Howard University, the Atmospheric Sciences and Meteorology, and they also work with other universities as well. Okay. And then what it's also mentioned, the Graduate Research Internship Program. If you are a graduate student and you are funded through NSF, you can intern at NOAA for about 3 to 12 months. You have to have the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship or the NSF Geosciences Grant. You can go online. If you look for NOAA GRIP, you'll see like different opportunities. But if you don't see an opportunity there, you can actually contact the office you're interested in working at and talk to them, and then they can submit an opportunity. Therefore, you can then come work with them. So it's a great program for working with NOAA Weather Service, and then you apply for this through the NSF Fast Lane. The Pathways program has been mentioned a lot today. These are internships for current students and recent graduates. They're posted on USA Jobs, and they can convert non-competitively to Fed positions upon completion. So I have a couple of comments here. Weather Service issues these on USA Jobs, but you must read them very carefully, because while some of them do convert, there are we do put out announcements that are only for the summer. While they're paid, they don't convert. So, but at the same time, it's a great opportunity. You can put it on your resume. So you just want to keep your eye out, and there's not much notice. They just sort of can come out anytime during the year. Let's see. And so you could work at the Weather Service through this during the summer, or it can even be a semester, and then you can keep coming back in the summer until you graduate. And NCEP has had Pathways students as well. The eligibility, you have to be enrolled in an accredited high school or college institution. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about, also give my point of view a little bit on, how do you get a job now at Weather Service and more importantly, NCEP? And I'm not sure how much more I can add to what's already been said, but I'll share a little bit more. I think, so you need to know the requirements for a meteorologist, for a physical scientist. You can find that as on the OPM, Office of Personnel Management website, or USA Jobs, because you want to see what coursework is required. You want to get your solid science background, but you also want to prepare by taking classes in other areas. And this is, again, it's not just about meteorology anymore. It's about communication, project management, policy, social science. And overall in the Weather Service, we don't just have meteorologists, which you're probably sensing. We have system engineers, program managers, budget analysts, IT software developers, international affairs, congressional affairs, public and media communication. Again, participating in leadership classes, programs, activities, volunteering. The more you can do that, the better, the stronger your application is going to be. And then be active in scientific societies like AMS or AGU. And I mean, all the committees should have students on them, so you can go look them up on the AMS web pages. Whether you see a student on their membership list or not, reach out to the chair and say, hey, I'm very interested in joining the committee. And then another piece of advice is go to USA Jobs and sign up for the alerts. So you're getting them. You can decide, I think you can decide whether to get them daily or maybe a different frequency, but that way you can see what's coming out. And even if you haven't graduated yet, you can see what's required, what's going to be required of you. And also, when they do come out on USA Jobs, they're typically could just be for 2 weeks. 2 weeks is the norm. It does not mean that there's somebody already in mind. So, so definitely have your resume ready to go. And then let me just switch a little bit. What does the hiring manager want to know about me? How can I make my application stand out? Again, now when you're actually applying, they are looking at grades. They want to make sure you had good grades. Doesn't have to be, perfect grades, but, decent. The cover letter could definitely help. Why do you want this job and why should we choose you? What did you do to show initiative? Definitely spell that out. And again, in your application package, reviewing, again, any spelling errors and any grammar issues. Highly recommend having somebody review your resume. I find many times with students, they bring it to their university career centers and they provide some good advice, but it may not be practical for the weather service. So if you know someone in the weather service, someone in the meteorology field, ask them to review your application. And the other thing is, I find many times students underestimate their experience. Like as I talk to them, things come out that were not in their resume. So it's like, just sit and think of everything you've done first before you figure out your final format. For example, did you participate in a forecast challenge? You could put that in. Sometimes people maybe do a forecast in their school's TV station. They think, oh, I just did that once. No, put that in. Are you familiar with AWIPS or some other programming language that we use here at NCEP? Put that in. I mean, we see those things. So anyways, so I know getting close on time. So I'm going to put this up for now, and then I can take some questions. These are the different sites I'm going to recommend. The first one is the Office of Education. That's where you can find out about the Hollings and EPP and all the other programs NOAA has. And then the second one is our NCEP program, and then third, just want to mention the WFO web pages. So I'd be happy to take some questions, Ryan, if there are any.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Fisher, for taking the time. We do have a couple questions, and I've been pretty good at answering these. There's one that I don't know that you may have some insight to. And this is from Erin. She says, does NOAA utilize the workforce recruitment program for students with disabilities? Is that something that students can use to get internships with NOAA?
Yeah, the answer is yes, we do participate in that program.
Okay, awesome.
I can't speak more that I know that we do. I know we promote it at our centers, and sometimes we participate in events that Workforce Management Office might organize, but we do.
Mm-hmm. There's another one here from Amanda. How would I find more information on volunteering or shadowing someone at the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City? Should I call the center or go in and personally talk to someone?
Okay, so the issue about, just trying to show up is there's going to be a security guard there, so that might be difficult. I would recommend, first of all, that person could contact me. I'm happy to make the introduction, or you just go on the webpage, look for somebody, and just reach out to them. I mean, Aviation Weather Center, along with our other centers, are always happy to talk to students.
Yeah, and I can also, Amanda, if you get in touch with me as well, and this is how, coming to stuff like this, you make some contacts, right? I actually mentored somebody that works for the Aviation Weather Center now, and I know that that person would be more than happy to talk to you as well. So, it just shows you that building that network and just putting yourself out there, asking the questions, you don't get there unless you ask. And so, that's just one example. I also put a plug in for our student internship program. I've been involved with ours here in Raleigh for 10 years now. We work primarily with North Carolina State University students. And so, but if you are in the area and within driving distance, we also have some volunteer work occasionally that we've had people from NC Central. We've had people from as far away as Greensboro and Winston-Salem, even in parts of Virginia. So my advice is if you're looking for stuff and you're not within driving distance of Washington, D.C., and there's other stuff out there, definitely make those contacts with your local office. Mm-hmm. Let's see, here's another question. In terms of the internships, is there generally a preference for juniors over sophomores when considering all of the applicants, or is that usually not a factor?
I would say between sophomores and juniors, it's really not a factor because sometimes people get more experience earlier on. We just know at freshman level, they probably didn't gain enough experience. And then we feel by senior level, they probably should be looking for a job. So that's why we don't, that's why we sort of focus on the sophomore, junior level.
Great. I don't see any more questions. Again, everybody, if you've been here from the start, thank you so much for sticking it out through the whole thing. You've got a treasure trove of information here to call on. I just want to make an announcement that I've had several questions that yes, this has been recorded. I plan on cutting this up into the individual talks, and if my Final Cut Pro skills are what I think they are, I should be able to do that and then take some of the relevant questions and put them with the specific talks. So, but there'll probably be one huge file as well if you want all the talks. That may take me a couple of weeks to get together, but everybody who had their email address and registered for this will get an email when we figure out where those are going to be housed. So look for that. And again, if you have any other questions for any of our presenters, feel free to send me an email or them directly, and they'll be happy to talk to you. Thanks so much, Dr. Fisher, again, for taking the time. And it's a great program you got there, and we're happy to promote it.
Great, thank you.